The morning began in silence. The kind of silence that only very large houses know. It was the kind that sits in the corners, waiting for someone to speak first. The sun had just started climbing over the Waverly estate, spilling gold across the trimmed hedges and the glass veranda. Sprinklers whispered over emerald lawns, and the scent of early jasmine drifted through the air. Everything gleamed, everything behaved, except for one small human tremor in the middle of that perfect order. Down by the garden beds, Naomi Fields knelt in her faded uniform. Her hands trembled as she picked through the damp grass. To anyone watching from a distance, it might have looked like she was weeding. But if you stepped closer, if you had the courage to really look, you'd see the truth. She wasn't tending the garden. She was eating it. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, as though ashamed to be seen touching food that wasn't meant for her. Each blade she lifted to her lips shook a little in the morning light. The dew clung to her skin like tears that refused to fall. Her stomach tightened with hunger, but it was the shame that hurt more. In the kitchen behind her, the door was locked. It had been locked since the night before, after the housekeeper announced that staff meals were postponed until further notice. That order, like most orders in the mansion, had come from Vivian Langford, the lady of the house. She didn't like seeing staff at the dining counters. It disrupted the atmosphere. And so Naomi had spent the night cleaning the hallways, watching trays of untouched food being carried past her. She had told herself she'd be fine. She'd eaten less before. But the morning came with dizziness, and when she stepped outside to water the roses, her legs gave way. The smell of wet grass, alive, earthy, forgiving, was too much to resist. That was the moment Alexander Waverly, the billionaire owner of the estate, saw her. From his second-floor office, he had been reviewing reports, charts about profits and philanthropy, percentages of productivity, all the things that looked like control. He had been preparing a speech about equality for his company's diversity conference. Then, through the wide glass window, he caught a movement in the garden. At first, he thought Naomi had found something. Then he saw her lift it to her mouth and chew. His body froze. The papers slid from his hands. For a heartbeat, he didn't breathe. There was no way. Surely she was tasting herbs, some plant for the compost. But no. He saw her eyes close, her shoulders fold, the way someone does when trying not to cry while swallowing. He pushed back his chair. "Vivian!" he called, but she was not in the room. He hesitated, torn between disbelief and guilt that he couldn't name. He had built entire foundations on fighting hunger overseas, yet hunger was kneeling in his garden. He hurried downstairs, nearly tripping over the last marble step. Outside, the air hit him, warm, clean, expensive. Naomi heard footsteps behind her and froze. Her first thought was, "I'm fired." Her second thought was, maybe that's mercy. "Naomi?" Alex's voice cracked in the open air. "What are you doing?" She didn't turn. Her throat refused words. A long pause fell between them, stretched thin by wind and shame. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Just cleaning, sir." He took another step closer. "You were eating," he said softly, not as an accusation, but as a confession. Naomi lowered her head. The world tilted. She wanted the ground to swallow her. "There wasn't anything else, sir," Mrs. Langford said. He stopped her with a lifted hand, but not out of authority, out of guilt. His voice faltered. "Who told you couldn't eat in the house?" She said the kitchen was for staff who know their place. The words landed like stones. Behind him, a gardener pretending to trim bushes turned away. Everyone knew. No one ever spoke. Alex's pulse hammered in his temples. He knelt without thinking, lowering himself until his knees sank into the wet grass beside hers. For a man who had knelt only at weddings and funerals, the motion felt strange and right all at once. "Naomi," he said quietly, no one should ever have to do that in my home." She looked at him then, really looked, at the man whose name was printed on magazines and donation plaques. His face wasn't cruel, just lost. And maybe for the first time, he was seeing her. Not the uniform, not the title, just her. The silence between them grew softer. A robin chirped from the hedge as if to fill the space. Alex stood, his hands trembling. "I'll speak to Vivian, right now." Naomi shook her head quickly. "Please don't, sir. She'll make it worse. I can manage." He stared at her, horrified that managing meant starving. Then quietly, he said, "Not anymore." He turned toward the mansion, his shoes leaving dark impressions in the wet soil. As he disappeared up the stone steps, Naomi remained on her knees, too stunned to move. She pressed a hand over her heart, not sure if what she felt was fear or the faint pulse of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Sometimes, the first sound of change isn't a shout. It's the soft, broken sound of someone swallowing what they were never meant to eat. And sometimes, the person watching learns that wealth can feed everything but compassion. The kitchen of the Waverly estate looked like a cathedral made for food. Marble counters gleamed beneath brass light fixtures. Imported tiles shone with polished perfection. Everything here was beautiful, except for what it represented. For years, this kitchen had been the line that divided the house. Staff cooked in it, but were not allowed to eat there. Food was plated, served, and carried out, but never shared. The rule was simple and cruel. House staff used the service corridor. Naomi Fields knew that rule better than anyone. She had worked here for 5 years, long enough to learn how silence keeps you safe. Every morning she came before dawn, wiping away the traces of other people's comfort. She scrubbed dishes still warm from late-night parties, polished glasses that cost more than her month's wages, and smiled politely when she was told, "Don't be seen after guests arrive." Her hands were steady, but her stomach often ached. The day after the garden incident, she entered the kitchen again, unsure whether she'd still have a job. The air smelled of coffee and baked bread. 2 chefs whispered near the ovens, their voices fading when she appeared. Someone muttered, "That's her." Another said, "The one the boss saw in the yard." Naomi lowered her eyes and pretended not to hear. She looked around at the counters, the clean plates, the small wooden stool where she used to sit during breaks before the rules changed. The stool was gone. The space where it stood now gleamed empty, like a missing tooth in a perfect smile. She felt her breath catch. Behind her, the door opened with a soft hiss. Vivian Langford entered, wearing pale silk and diamonds that caught the morning light. Her perfume followed her like a statement. "Naomi," she said, her voice smooth but cold. "I heard my husband spoke to you yesterday." Naomi froze. "Yes, ma'am. He did." Vivian's heels clicked against the tile. "I hope you understand that what you did was unacceptable. There are procedures. Staff meals are served at noon. There was no reason to behave like—" She stopped herself just before the word animal slipped out. Her lips tightened into a practiced smile instead. Like someone without discipline. Naomi's throat tightened. She wanted to explain that she hadn't eaten since the night before. that her son's medication required food, that hunger had pushed her past reason. But she knew words would only make things worse. "Yes, ma'am," she said softly. Vivian tilted her head, studying Naomi the way one studies a stain that won't come out. "Good. Let's make sure we never repeat that embarrassment." She turned and left, her heels echoing through the hall. Naomi stood alone in the kitchen, staring at her reflection in the polished copper pots. For a moment she thought of walking out, but where would she go? In the small room behind the pantry, a photo of her 8-year-old son Micah sat on a shelf. He was smiling, wide, brave, missing one front tooth. His heart condition had worsened that month. The hospital had called twice to remind her about the surgery deposit. She'd promised to send it soon, so she stayed. Upstairs, Alexander Waverly sat at his desk, the events of the morning still burning in his mind. He had confronted Vivian after the garden, his voice breaking for the first time in years. "You locked the kitchen?" he demanded. "You starved our staff?" Vivian had crossed her arms calmly. "Don't exaggerate, Alex. It's about hygiene. The staff have their own quarters. It's always been this way." "And you think that makes it right?" "It makes it organized," she said, turning away. "You're not the one who has to manage the help." The argument ended in silence, a silence thick with old money and older habits. Now, alone, Alex scrolled through his company's philanthropic website. Hunger relief, clean water, global aid. A line of text stared back at him. Waverly Foundation, building dignity through compassion. He closed the laptop. For the first time, the word compassion felt heavy. In the afternoon, Naomi joined the other staff for their meal in the service corridor, a narrow passage between the kitchen and the laundry. The air smelled of detergent and steam. The table was a long piece of metal used for folding linens. A few workers ate quickly, eyes darting toward the door. No one talked much. "Did he really kneel?" one whispered. Naomi nodded once. "He did." "What did it feel like?" another asked quietly. "Strange," she said, "like the world turned upside down for a second." Ruth Gardner, the elderly housekeeper, gave her a gentle smile. "Maybe it's about time it did." Naomi smiled faintly, though she didn't believe it yet. That night, as she wiped down the marble counters, Naomi overheard Vivian speaking with a visitor in the sitting room. The door was slightly ajar, her voice crisp and rehearsed. "I told Alexander that discipline is necessary," Vivian said. "Otherwise, these people start thinking they're equals." Naomi's hand froze on the counter. The phrase echoed like thunder in her chest. These people. She turned off the light and stood in the dark kitchen. The refrigerator hummed softly, steady and cold. She placed her palm against the cool metal door and whispered, "One day, Micah, we'll eat where we belong." Upstairs, Alex sat awake beside the window, staring at the same garden where he had seen Naomi that morning. He thought about how he had never noticed the rules that kept his own home divided. The house he had built for peace had been built on quiet harm. He poured himself a glass of water and muttered, "No more." Tomorrow, he decided, the kitchen door would stay open, and for the first time in years, that promise felt more urgent than any business deal waiting on his desk. Every house has rules, but some rules are only walls wearing fancy names. When compassion knocks on those walls, they echo before they fall. The next morning arrived brighter than usual, as if the sky itself had been waiting for something to change. Sunlight spilled through the east windows of the Waverly estate. turning the long corridors into rivers of gold. Dust floated gently in the air, tiny worlds suspended in light. For the first time in years, the kitchen door was unlocked. Naomi Fields stepped inside slowly, as if crossing into a forbidden temple. The smell of bread, coffee, and sugar filled her lungs, simple things that felt like a luxury. A small tremor ran through her hands when she touched the counter. "Morning, Naomi," Ruth Gardner said from behind the sink, her voice soft and careful. She had worked in the house since before Naomi arrived, and in her weathered eyes, there was both caution and hope. "Morning," Naomi answered. "The door was open," Ruth smiled faintly. "I heard Mr. Waverly left orders. No more locks. He said, 'Everyone eats here together.'" Naomi blinked, not sure she'd heard correctly. Together. The word sounded unfamiliar, like a song she used to know but had forgotten how to sing. From the far end of the kitchen, the chef hesitated. "Does Mrs. Langford know?" he whispered. "She'll find out soon enough," Ruth murmured. "Best enjoy this moment before the storm." Naomi nodded, trying to believe it. For the first time, she sat down at the staff corner table, lifted a cup of warm tea, and let the taste of it rest on her tongue. The warmth spread through her chest like sunlight. Upstairs, Vivian Langford adjusted her pearl earrings in the mirror. Her reflection looked flawless, every strand of hair in place, her expression perfectly composed. But inside, irritation simmered. Her husband's mood the night before had been different. He hadn't eaten dinner, hadn't spoken much, just stared out the window with that faraway look, the one that meant he was thinking about something inconvenient. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said sharply. A maid entered, nervous. "Mrs. Langford, the staff, they're having breakfast in the main kitchen." Vivian turned slowly. "What did you say?" "They said Mr. Waverly left instructions." For a second, the room went still. Then Vivian smiled. Thin, dangerous. "Thank you. That will be all." As the maid scurried away, Vivian reached for her robe and headed downstairs. The sharp rhythm of her heels echoed like warning drums. The kitchen quieted when she appeared. Naomi stood quickly, cup trembling in her hand. Ruth pretended to keep washing dishes, but her eyes followed every move. Vivian's voice cut through the air like a blade. "What is this?" No one answered. The chef's hands froze over the dough. "I asked," Vivian repeated, stepping forward, "why the kitchen is full of staff eating like guests in a restaurant." Sakai inhaled slowly. "Mr. Waverly said," Vivian raised her hand. "I know what my husband said. I'm asking why you thought his temporary confusion overrules the structure of this household." She turned toward Naomi. "And you seem to be at the center of this, as usual." Naomi swallowed hard. "I only did what I was told, ma'am." "What you were told?" Vivian's laugh was light but sharp. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? The gossip among the staff, the questions from the press. I've had to answer calls all morning about some ridiculous rumor that my husband—" She stopped herself again, catching her breath. Her gaze softened into false sympathy. "I know you've been under stress, your situation with your child. Perhaps hunger made you desperate. But don't mistake my husband's compassion for permission to overstep your place." Naomi lowered her head, but her voice trembled with quiet defiance. "I never asked for compassion, ma'am. I just wanted to eat." The room went silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Vivian's lips parted in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Naomi looked up. Her eyes were steady, not angry, just tired. You said we should know our place. I do. It's here, working, serving, but that doesn't mean starving. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the kitchen door opened again, and Alexander Waverly stepped inside. His sleeves were rolled, his expression calm but unyielding. "Vivian," he said, his tone flat. "Enough." She turned toward him, her composure cracking. "Alex, we'll talk later. This is not your concern." "It is my concern," he said, his voice steady. "This is my house." Vivian's eyes flashed. "Then control it." "I'm trying," he said quietly, "by ending this nonsense." He crossed the room, placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder. She froze, unsure if it was comfort or command. "From today forward," Alex said to everyone present, "no one will be barred from the kitchen. No one will eat apart. If we can share a roof, we can share a meal." Ruth nodded slowly. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the staff. Vivian's face drained of color. "You're humiliating yourself," she hissed. "No," Alex said, meeting her gaze. "I'm undoing humiliation." The words landed between them like thunder. Vivian stood still for a moment, her breath uneven. Then she turned and walked out, her heels striking the floor in furious rhythm. When the sound faded, Naomi realized everyone was watching her. She didn't know what to do, so she did what felt right. She sat down again, slowly, and took another sip of tea. The chef hesitated, then handed her a slice of warm bread. "Eat," he said gently. Naomi smiled, a small, cautious smile, but it was real. For the first time in years, she tasted bread that wasn't stolen, eaten standing in a hallway, or swallowed with fear. It was warm and soft, and it made her eyes fill with tears she didn't try to hide. Alex stood quietly in the doorway, watching. Sunlight fell across the room, lighting the scene like a photograph waiting to be remembered. He thought of the garden yesterday, the grass, the silence, and how a single moment of truth could change everything. He exhaled slowly. This is how it should have been all along. That afternoon, a rumor spread beyond the mansion gates. A reporter had heard about the confrontation, about the billionaire who knelt in the grass and changed his own rules. The story would soon reach the world. But for now, inside the house, there was only the hum of life returning where silence once ruled. Naomi washed her cup, wiped her hands, and stepped out into the sunlight. For the first time, the air didn't smell like shame. It smelled like home. Sometimes, power kneels and the world trembles. But sometimes, power stands, and kindness finally begins. The sunlight that morning didn't just fill a room. It entered a conscience. The next day smelled of something new, yeast and possibility. By 7 in the morning, the mansion's kitchen was alive in a way it had never been. Pans clattered, laughter flickered, and sunlight fell freely across the room that had once felt like a stage for silence. For the first time, everyone was allowed to be seen. Naomi Fields arrived quietly, as she always did. But today there was a subtle change in her step. It wasn't pride exactly. It was steadiness, a woman learning how to stand without apology. "Morning, Miss Fields," said Ruth Gardner, already busy at the stove. Her gray hair was tied in a neat bun, her hands moving with the rhythm of long habit. Naomi smiled. "Morning, Ruth." The other workers were still cautious, as if the new rule might vanish if they spoke too loudly. But the air itself felt lighter. The kitchen door remained wide open, no key hanging from its lock. "Mr. Waverly meant what he said," Ruth whispered. "You should have seen his face last night. Like someone just told him his house had been lying to him." Naomi poured water into a kettle. Maybe it was. Upstairs, Alexander Waverly stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching the garden below. He saw Naomi moving through the kitchen like a conductor guiding a quiet orchestra. Everything seemed ordinary, and that was the miracle of it. Vivian hadn't come down yet. He knew she was furious. The storm had just been delayed. He didn't blame her for the anger. Not entirely. Anger was what happens when comfort meets truth. But he was done protecting comfort. He turned to his reflection in the glass and whispered, "We'll start small. Bread before justice, but both will come." At 8 o'clock, the bell rang for breakfast. Normally, staff would clear out before the family entered, but today the house operated differently. Vivian appeared in the doorway, perfectly dressed, perfectly composed. Her eyes swept across the kitchen and landed on Alex, who stood near the counter, buttering a slice of bread. "Good morning," he said calmly. "You should try this. Freshly baked." Naomi supervised the recipe. The silence that followed could have frozen steam. Vivian stared at him as if he'd spoken another language. "Supervised?" "She has experience," Alex said, taking a seat at the long table. "You remember, she ran the kitchen at her old job before coming here." Vivian's jaw tightened. "You're turning staff into management now?" He smiled faintly. "Why not? Competence doesn't depend on class." Naomi froze mid-step, unsure whether to retreat or stand her ground. But Alex gestured toward the table. "Sit," he said. "Eat something." Her instinct screamed no. Years of habit, of knowing what lines not to cross. But the tone in his voice wasn't a command. It was an invitation. She hesitated. Then, with Ruth's gentle nod, she sat. The sound of a chair scraping tile had never been so loud. Vivian's eyes flashed, but Alex kept his calm, spreading jam on his toast like he was diffusing a bomb. Ruth poured tea for everyone, even Vivian, who didn't touch it. For a long moment, they all just sat there. Billionaire, wife, maid, housekeeper, breathing the same air, eating from the same loaf of bread. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. Something sacred had shifted. After breakfast, Alex called Naomi to the library. The tall windows filled the room with soft amber light. Shelves of unread books towered behind him. "I want to formalize your position," he began. "You've been running this house for years without credit. It's time you had authority. I'd like to make you house manager." Naomi blinked. "Sir, I don't—" "You do," he interrupted gently. "You already keep this place standing. I only own it." She looked down at her hands. "People will talk." "They already do," he said, smiling faintly. "Let them talk about fairness for a change." Naomi hesitated. "I don't want charity." "Then don't take it as charity," he replied. "Take it as recognition?" The word lingered in the air. Recognition. Something she had lived her whole life without. Finally, she nodded. "All right." Alex exhaled in relief. "Good. We'll announce it at tomorrow's staff meeting." When she left, he sat back, rubbing his temples. Part of him felt lighter, part of him terrified. Reform sounded noble until it touched your own home. That afternoon, Naomi visited the staff quarters to speak with the others. Some were supportive, some frightened. "The lady will have your head," one whispered. "She'll try," Naomi said calmly. "Why risk it?" another asked. "Because someone has to," she said simply. Ruth stood beside her, steady as an oak. "Don't let fear run this house any longer," she said to the others. "It's had enough of that." One by one, the workers nodded. It wasn't a revolution. It was a quiet awakening, the kind that begins with shared bread and eye contact. Later that evening, the inevitable happened. Vivian confronted Alex in the study, voice cold and sharp as crystal. "You've humiliated me in front of the entire staff." "I've corrected a mistake," he said. "You're turning our home into some sort of social experiment. What's next? You'll invite them to dine with our guests? If that's what it takes to teach our guests manners." Her face hardened. "You don't understand the consequences. The board will see this as instability. Investors fear chaos." Alex looked at her quietly. "If equality looks like chaos to them, maybe we've been investing in the wrong kind of order." She stared, unable to find an answer. He softened his tone. "Vivian, I'm not your enemy, but I can't live in a house that feeds pride more faithfully than people." Vivian's voice trembled, a crack of something human beneath the ice. "You're destroying the legacy we built." "No," he said gently. "I'm finally building it." That night, Naomi wrote a note to herself on a scrap of paper and placed it inside Micah's photograph frame. "Today I sat at the table. Tomorrow I will keep it open." Outside, the garden swayed in the evening breeze. The same grass she once ate now glistened under moonlight. It looked different tonight, alive, not with shame, but with the promise that something buried deep was beginning to grow again. Change rarely begins with thunder. Sometimes it starts with the sound of bread being shared, of old rules cracking just enough for light to slip through. The morning after the first shared meal, the mansion felt suspended between two worlds, one still clinging to the old silence, and another learning, awkwardly, to breathe. In the kitchen, laughter came in short, cautious bursts. Someone hummed while stirring oatmeal. Someone else dared to joke about the weather. Yet, beneath every sound, there was an invisible thread of tension, as if the walls themselves were listening. Naomi Fields arrived early. She walked through the hall with her shoulders straight, her uniform crisp, her eyes steady. She wasn't trying to look brave, but courage had begun to feel like habit. On the counter sat a new nameplate, House Manager N. Fields. The letters gleamed like sunlight on clean water. She ran her finger across it, half in disbelief. Ruth Gardner entered behind her, carrying a tray of fresh herbs from the garden. "Look at that," Ruth said softly. "Finally carved your name into something other than laundry tags." Naomi smiled, but quietly. "It feels strange. Strange good or strange bad?" "Both." Ruth nodded knowingly. "That's what change feels like before it sticks." Upstairs, Vivian Langford watched through the security monitor, her morning tea untouched. She had not slept well. The footage showed Naomi moving confidently through the kitchen, issuing instructions to staff who now looked to her for direction. It was unbearable. Vivian turned to her reflection in the mirror. Her own name had always carried weight, Langford, the lineage of marble and restraint. She had spent her entire marriage making sure no one forgot the hierarchy that defined her world. Now, a maid was being applauded for breaking it. Her phone buzzed. It was her attorney, Martin Grayson. "Vivian," he said, voice low and practiced. "I reviewed the household agreements. You're listed as co-owner of the estate. If your husband's decisions are damaging family reputation, we could claim managerial interference." "You mean, declare him unfit?" "In a private capacity, yes. It would give you control over household operations again." Vivian closed her eyes. The word unfit echoed with a strange thrill. "Prepare the paperwork." Meanwhile, in the staff dining room, Naomi stood before a small group of workers, the same people who had once avoided her eyes. "I just want to say thank you," she began, her hands clasped in front of her. "What happened in the garden wasn't meant to shame anyone. It was hunger, that's all. But Mr. Waverly listened. That means something. Let's not waste it. A young maid raised her hand. Do you really think he'll keep this up? People like them always change their minds. Naomi looked around the room. Maybe. But it's not just about him now. It's about us. We keep this door open by how we treat each other. If one person is hungry, we're all unfinished. Ruth smiled from the corner. Preach it, girl. The group laughed softly. For a moment, they almost forgot where they were. Later that day, Naomi was called to the library. She found Alexander Waverly pacing, papers spread across the mahogany desk. His expression was kind, but shadowed by worry. Naomi, he said, gesturing for her to sit. The new policies, open meals, equal wages, they're causing conversation among my board members. Bad conversation? Mostly confusion, he admitted. Some think I've lost focus. Others think I'm trying to look progressive for the press. They don't understand this isn't a campaign. Naomi hesitated. Maybe they'll see once the results show. He smiled faintly. Results take time. Investors don't like waiting. Her brow furrowed. You're risking a lot for this. So are you. He sat across from her, his tone softening. How's Micah? Better, she said, though her voice trembled slightly. The doctor says he'll need surgery soon. I'm trying to save what I can. Alex nodded. We'll make sure he gets it. Naomi straightened. Sir, I don't want... He raised a hand gently. No charity. I know. Just a fair chance. The words eased the tension in her shoulders. That's all anyone wants. By evening, the first hints of rebellion appeared. Vivian held a private meeting with 2 senior staff members in the formal dining hall. The air smelled of lemon polish and old money. I know my husband means well, she said sweetly, but we all know how fragile order can be. These sudden changes, they confuse people. They make it hard to respect the right boundaries. The butler nodded slowly. It's been unusual, ma'am. Vivian smiled. Exactly. You've been loyal for years. All I ask is that you keep notes. Who's following procedure, who isn't. I'll handle the rest. She slid a slim envelope across the table. It glinted with the kind of reward loyalty tends to understand. The next morning, Naomi noticed the shift. Conversations hushed when she entered a room. Some staff followed her orders with tight smiles. Others avoided her completely. A bowl of fruit she'd placed for breakfast disappeared, replaced by an empty platter. Ruth saw her expression and sighed. Vivian's moving pieces again. Naomi's voice wavered. I thought we were past this. Old habits die louder than you think, Ruth said. But don't let them drag you down. You've already cracked the mirror, and that's how the light gets in. Naomi smiled weakly, grateful for Ruth's steady faith. That evening, when the household finally quieted, Naomi sat alone in the staff lounge. She opened a small notebook, one she'd started keeping since her promotion. Inside, she wrote every unfair thing that had ever happened in the house, every kindness that had almost gone unseen. At the top of the page, she wrote, Truth has no rank. Then she looked out the window. The garden swayed gently under the moonlight. The same patch of grass that had once humiliated her now, whispering something softer. Forgiveness, maybe, or warning. Upstairs, Vivian sealed an envelope addressed to the family attorney. The ink was still wet on the document that claimed her husband was temporarily unfit to manage household decisions due to emotional instability. As she pressed the wax seal shut, a small crack appeared in the edge of her vanity mirror, a thin silver line running through her reflection. She touched it lightly, unaware that in another part of the house, Naomi was writing the same truth in a notebook that no one could erase. When power starts to lose its reflection, it blames the mirror. But the first crack is never the end of beauty. It's the beginning of seeing what was hidden underneath. The next few days unfolded like a calm before thunder. Everything looked orderly. The chandeliers still glowed, the silverware still gleamed. But beneath the surface, the Waverly estate was beginning to split apart. Quietly, invisibly. Naomi Fields could feel it in the air. It wasn't one big storm. It was 1,000 small chills. The way voices fell silent when she entered a room. The glances, traded between staff who used to greet her warmly. The smiles that vanished too quickly. The house was obeying her new rules, but not her spirit. Ruth Gardner noticed it too. She was wiping the counter when Naomi came in that morning, shoulders tight from a night of restless sleep. "They're testing you," Ruth said gently. "That's how the old world fights back, slow and polite." Naomi nodded. "It's not them I'm worried about. It's what's moving behind them." She didn't say the name, but they both knew who she meant. Vivian Langford. Upstairs, Vivian sat with her lawyer, Martin Grayson, reviewing a neat folder of documents spread across the breakfast table. The morning light turned the papers golden, but the words were sharp as glass. "Once you sign this," Martin explained, "we'll submit it as a formal petition. It's private, discreet. The claim is that your husband's emotional decisions are damaging the household's reputation and stability. That gives you interim authority." Vivian's expression remained calm, but her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly as she reached for the pen. "He's lost perspective," she said, almost convincing herself. "He's making a spectacle of our family. Do you know he invited that woman to manage the house? Next, he'll have her on the company payroll." Martin smiled politely, used to the bitterness of the wealthy. "Then this document will protect your interests." Vivian signed her name with elegant precision, one stroke that could divide a marriage. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Naomi gathered the staff for their weekly meeting. The smell of coffee mixed with tension. "I know some of you are uncomfortable with the changes," she began. "That's fair. Change is heavy when it asks us to stand straighter. But this house, our work, deserves honesty. We won't survive on silence." A young maid shifted uneasily. "Mrs. Langford says Mr. Waverly's losing control. She said you're making him look bad." Naomi inhaled slowly, forcing calm. "Mrs. Langford is scared. Fear makes people speak in strange ways. But fairness isn't disrespect. It's repair." Someone muttered. "Easy for you to say. You have his protection." Naomi's eyes softened. "I have no protection. I have a job and a voice, that's all." The room went quiet. Ruth gave her a small nod of solidarity. Then a sudden buzz cut through the silence. Someone's phone vibrating on the counter. A headline flashed across the screen. "Billionaire's household scandal sparks media curiosity." Naomi felt her chest tighten. "What is this?" Ruth read aloud softly. "Rumors suggest internal conflict between Alexander and Vivian Waverly after allegations of mistreatment toward domestic staff." The article included a blurry photo, Alex kneeling in the garden, sunlight on his shoulder. Naomi's name wasn't printed, but everyone knew. "Oh no," she whispered. By midday, the phone lines at the estate were flooded. Reporters camped near the gates. Camera flashes glimmered beyond the hedges. Vivian seized the opportunity. She stood on the mansion's front steps, her voice sweetly composed as she addressed the small crowd. "My husband's heart is kind, she told them. But kindness can be misguided. We've always treated our employees well. Unfortunately, certain individuals have misunderstood that generosity. The reporters scribbled quickly. Someone shouted, "Are you referring to your new house manager?" Vivian's smile didn't falter. We value every member of our staff, but not all transitions are seamless. Sometimes gratitude is replaced with entitlement. That was all the headline needed. Waverly wife accuses Maid of exploiting sympathy. When Naomi read the article that evening, her stomach turned cold. The words cut deeper than she expected. Exploiting sympathy, as if dignity were a trick. She looked at her son Micah's photo again, the smile that never wavered despite his sickness. "I'm doing this for you," she whispered. Ruth entered quietly, holding a cup of tea. "They'll twist everything," she said. "That's what people with power do when they're scared of losing it." Naomi nodded. "Then we'll give them something real to twist." "What do you mean?" "I mean we stop waiting for the storm. We stand in it." That night, Naomi wrote a letter, not to the press, but to Alex. She left it on his office desk before leaving for her quarters. When Alex returned late, exhausted from fielding calls, he found the note folded neatly. "Mr. Waverly, I didn't ask for attention, and I don't need protection. But I can't let your wife speak for what she doesn't understand. People are hungry, sir, not just for food, but for fairness. Please don't fight this in silence. Let them see the truth before the lie becomes history. Naomi." He read it twice, the words steady and graceful. Then he looked out the window toward the garden, remembering the first time he saw her kneeling there. The same strength, the same quiet defiance. He made a decision. The next morning, he called Daniel Ortiz, a senior HR investigator from his company's ethics division. "Daniel," he said, "I want an internal audit, not of the company, but of my own home. I need you to treat it like any corporate inquiry. 10 years of records, every staff complaint, every firing." There was a pause on the line. "Sir, that's highly unusual." "I'm aware," Alex said firmly. "Do it anyway." When Daniel arrived that afternoon, the atmosphere was electric. Staff whispered as he carried files into the library. Vivian appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" "An internal audit," Alex said plainly. "Full review." Her face paled. "You're investigating your own wife?" "I'm investigating my home," he replied. Vivian's voice broke through her composure. "You're destroying us." "No," he said quietly. "I'm saving what can still be saved." He turned to Naomi. "You'll assist Mr. Ortiz. Full access to all records." Naomi hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." As she walked past Vivian, the air between them crackled. Vivian whispered, almost too low to hear, "You think you've won, but houses remember who built them." Naomi met her gaze. "Then maybe it's time the house remembered everyone who kept it standing." That night, Naomi sat by her window as thunder rolled far in the distance. Rain began to fall, gentle but insistent. She whispered to herself, "Let it come." For the first time, she didn't fear the storm. She knew what grew after it. When truth begins to rise, lies call it rebellion. But thunder is only frightening to those who've never listened to rain. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the air still smelled of storms. Inside the Waverly estate, sunlight pooled cautiously across the marble floor, as if unsure whether it was welcome. On the dining table lay a thick envelope sealed in wax. Vivian Langford had signed it the night before, an elegant, unshaking signature at the bottom of a petition that claimed her husband was temporarily unfit to manage the household. The words had been chosen carefully, polished by lawyers until they sounded almost merciful. She hadn't slept afterward. Guilt had brushed against her once or twice, but she brushed it away harder. In her world, appearances came first. She believed rules were what kept chaos from swallowing privilege. And Naomi Fields, the maid who had become a symbol of defiance, was chaos wrapped in humility. This morning, Vivian rehearsed the story she'd tell herself. I'm protecting our home. I'm protecting Alex from himself. But even as she said it in her head, her reflection in the mirror looked unconvinced. In the library below, Alexander Waverly stood beside Daniel Ortiz, the investigator, reading through boxes of staff records. The papers smelled faintly of dust and citrus oil. Naomi stood nearby, her hands clasped in front of her. Half of the payroll records are missing, Daniel said, flipping through a binder. The earliest years show gaps. Unregistered workers, unpaid overtime. Some entries have been erased completely. Alex exhaled slowly. Erased by who? Daniel glanced toward the staircase where Vivian's footsteps echoed faintly. The handwriting matches old administrative notes, probably managed by Mrs. Langford. Naomi shifted uncomfortably. Sir, maybe this isn't something we should... It's exactly what we should, Alex interrupted softly. If silence built this house, truth can rebuild it. Naomi nodded, though part of her feared what truth might cost him. Later that afternoon, Naomi was summoned to a meeting she hadn't expected. A sleek black car waited outside the gates. The driver held a document in his hand. Mrs. Langford requests your signature, he said. It's a clarification statement, nothing serious. Naomi hesitated. What kind of clarification? Just confirmation that your position is temporary, he said. It helps with payroll processing. The lie was too polished to sound honest. Naomi folded her arms. Tell her I'll have my lawyer review it. The driver frowned. Do you have one? She smiled faintly. Not yet, but I'm learning how to say no. Inside the mansion, Vivian watched from an upstairs window as the car returned empty-handed. Her hand tightened around the curtain. So she wants to play that game, she muttered. She turned to Martin Grayson, her lawyer. Proceed with filing. If my husband insists on embarrassing himself, we'll remind the world who actually owns this house. Martin nodded. Understood. The petition goes out this afternoon. By evening, Alex received the news. The paper arrived through a courier, crisp and official, signed in Vivian's precise handwriting. The first line read, Petition for partial estate management transfer. His chest tightened. It wasn't just a legal strike. It was betrayal dressed in formality. Naomi stood nearby as he read it, her expression unsure. She's filed for control? She asked quietly. He nodded, his voice steady but heavy. Yes, she's turning fairness into evidence of instability. Naomi looked down. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Alex closed the folder. You didn't cause this. You revealed it. The next morning, the house filled with whispers. Newspapers reported, Langford versus Waverly, billionaire couple in domestic dispute over employee reforms. Board members from Alex's tech company called non-stop. Their voices came through the phone like an endless tide of polite panic. Alex, are you protecting this employee or protecting your image? One of them asked. He paused before answering. Maybe protecting my conscience is enough. They didn't know what to do with that answer, so they filled the silence with strategy and damage control. When the call ended, Alex rubbed his temples and leaned back in his chair. The more honest I try to be, he said softly, the more dishonest the world looks. Naomi, who had entered quietly with coffee, placed the cup beside him. Sometimes honesty doesn't fix things right away. It just stops them from getting worse. Her words landed gently. He looked up, managing a tired smile. You should have been a philosopher, not a housekeeper. I'm both, she said, almost playfully. Just underpaid. For the first time that day, he laughed, a small, startled sound, like someone remembering how. That evening, the mansion hosted what felt like a quiet war. Lawyers arrived in dark suits, auditors spread papers across tables, and every sound of pen on paper felt like a duel. Domestic workers in the United States are often excluded from traditional labor protections. They may lack formal HR systems, written contracts, or channels for grievance reporting. In cases like Naomi's, the law depends on testimony and character, whose voice is believed, whose silence counts as consent. The narrator's tone softened around the explanation, like a bedtime truth whispered to adults. The system was never made to protect the unseen. In the middle of it all, Naomi sat in the drawing room, waiting to be called in as a witness. Her palms were damp, her throat dry. She'd never been inside a legal proceeding before, not even one disguised as a family meeting. Ruth Gardner sat beside her, whispering, "Don't let fear write your story. Let truth do it." Naomi nodded, though her heartbeat disagreed. When she was finally called, the room fell quiet. Vivian sat at the far end, perfectly poised. Alex sat near the center, weary but unbroken. Martin Grayson cleared his throat. "Ms. Fields," he said, "is it true that you've received special privileges since Mr. Waverly intervened on your behalf?" Naomi met his gaze. "If food and fairness are privileges, then yes." A faint rustle spread across the room. He continued, "Do you feel Mr. Waverly acted out of sympathy or personal affection?" Naomi's answer came steady and soft. "I think he acted out of shame, but shame can be a seed if you plant it right." Even Vivian's expression faltered. Alex closed his eyes for a moment, holding back a wave of emotion. When the questioning ended, Naomi stood to leave. As she passed Alex, she paused just long enough to whisper, "Don't let them change the story." He nodded. Never. That night, Naomi returned to her small room and stared at her reflection in the window pane. The moonlight traced faint lines on the glass, like invisible signatures. So many papers had been signed today, petitions, statements, contracts, but none of them carried the weight of a promise. She whispered to herself, "Let my words be the first one that matters." Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing through the garden grass like pages turning. Paper holds power until conscience learns to write. In rooms of ink and signatures, silence is the loudest witness. The city courthouse did not look like a place where justice lived. Its walls were pale and peeling. Its ceiling lights buzzed faintly, and the floor tiles had seen too many footsteps to remember who was guilty and who was not. Still, that morning, Naomi Fields walked through its doors as if entering sacred ground. She wasn't there to win anything. She was there so her silence would no longer be mistaken for consent. Ruth Gardner accompanied her, carrying a thermos of tea. "Sip before you speak," she whispered. "Keeps your throat from drying." Naomi smiled gratefully. "You sound like my mother." "I'm old enough to be," Ruth replied, squeezing her hand. Inside, the arbitration hearing was already in session. A long table divided the room. On one side sat Vivian Langford, poised and perfect in her cream suit. On the other sat Alexander Waverly, sleeves rolled, expression calm but strained. Between them sat Judge Evelyn Price, a woman with silver hair, round glasses, and the kind of patience that could cut through thunder. The atmosphere hummed with unspoken history. Judge Price began gently, her voice steady and firm. This arbitration is to address the internal dispute between Mr. and Mrs. Waverly regarding household management and treatment of employees. We are not here for spectacle. We are here for clarity. Vivian's lawyer, Martin Grayson, rose first. Your Honor, my client simply wishes to restore stability. The staff has been given privileges that blur professional boundaries. This disruption has invited negative media attention and emotional confusion within the household. The words emotional confusion hung in the air like perfume, sweet, calculated, and choking. Naomi sat still, hands folded on her lap. She wasn't sure if she was allowed to speak yet, so she kept her eyes on the table's polished surface. Her reflection trembled slightly with each breath. When it was his turn, Alex stood. His tone was calm, but beneath it, something pulsed like thunder waiting its turn. I made changes because I realized I'd built a house on old harm, he said. I thought generosity meant fairness. I was wrong. Fairness begins when you stop pretending there's a difference between your comfort and someone else's hunger. A quiet murmur spread across the room. Even the clerk stopped typing for a moment. Martin smirked politely. That's a noble speech, Mr. Waverly. But this is a household, not a social movement. My client simply asks that domestic order be restored. Judge Price looked toward Naomi. Miss Fields, I understand you've become a central figure in this conflict. Would you like to speak? Naomi hesitated, her heart pounding. The room felt too large, her voice too small. But Ruth's words echoed softly in her memory. Sip before you speak. She took a small drink of tea, set the thermos down, and rose. Her voice began quietly but clear. Your Honor, I'm not here because of rebellion or favoritism. I'm here because I was hungry. She paused. The room was utterly still. Even the air seemed to lean closer. Naomi continued, her hands trembling only slightly. I worked in that house for 5 years. I cleaned rooms I could never afford to stay in. I served food I wasn't allowed to taste. When I was told I couldn't eat in the kitchen, I believed that rule was part of the job. I believed silence was respect. She took a slow breath, her eyes lowering to the table. One morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I was dizzy. My son was sick. I thought I could hide my hunger by stepping outside. But Mr. Waverly saw me. I was kneeling in the garden, eating grass. The words landed like thunder muffled under soft rain. A gasp rippled through the room. Cameras clicked in the back. Someone dropped a pen. Naomi's voice did not shake now. I ate grass because hunger was safer than asking. The silence that followed was deep enough to touch the heart of the building. Judge Price removed her glasses slowly. Miss Fields, she said quietly. Thank you. Vivian's expression flickered, a tremor beneath her polished composure. This is melodrama, she muttered, but her voice was too thin to hide the crack forming behind it. Naomi turned toward her, not in anger, but in quiet steadiness. Melodrama is what happens when truth finally speaks louder than habit. Judge Price leaned forward. Mrs. Langford, regardless of your intentions, this testimony indicates systemic mistreatment under your household policies. Mr. Ortiz's audit supports inconsistencies in pay and reporting. Vivian rose, defensive. You can't judge decades of tradition based on one servant's story. Judge Price replied softly. History is rewritten one story at a time, Mrs. Langford. Vivian's jaw tightened, but she sat down. The judge turned to Alex. Mr. Waverly, until we complete a formal review, I recommend an independent HR audit. External oversight ensures transparency on both sides. Alex nodded. Agreed. Vivian slammed her pen onto the table. This is ridiculous. You're treating my family like criminals. Judge Price's gaze didn't waver. No, Mrs. Langford. I'm treating your staff like people. The room fell silent again. Afterward, outside the courthouse, the press waited like a tide of flashbulbs and microphones. The afternoon light painted the steps gold. Naomi stepped out first, flanked by Ruth. She wasn't used to the noise, the shouting questions, the hands reaching forward. Naomi, do you blame the Waverlys for what happened? Are you suing? Do you plan to quit? She stopped on the top step, her heart racing. Then she spoke just loud enough to be heard, her tone gentle but firm. I don't blame anyone, she said. I just don't want anyone else to go hungry in silence. The crowd quieted for a beat, long enough for cameras to capture her face in the soft light. Behind her, Alex and Vivian emerged. They didn't speak. The distance between them was small in steps, but enormous in meaning. Later that evening, Naomi sat in the garden again. The air was cool, the grass damp beneath her shoes. For the first time, she didn't kneel to the ground. She stood upright, watching the sky shift from orange to violet. Ruth joined her, carrying 2 mugs of tea. You were brave today, she said. I was scared, Naomi admitted. Ruth smiled. That's what brave is made of. In the quiet of her own room that night, Naomi replayed the hearing in her mind. Not the questions, but the moment when the room had fallen still after her confession. The silence hadn't been empty this time. It had been listening. She lay down, whispering to herself, even silence can change sides. Dignity doesn't shout. It speaks once and waits for the world to listen. And when it does, even the walls that kept quiet for generations begin to echo the sound of truth. The morning after the hearing, the world outside the Waverly gates felt louder, sharper. News crews waited by the entrance, and headlines bloomed across screens like wildfire. The maid who spoke the unspeakable. From grass to grace, Naomi Fields and the billionaire's reckoning. Inside the mansion, however, silence returned. Not the cruel kind, but the heavy, uncertain quiet of people realizing their lives were changing. Naomi woke before dawn, sitting by the small photo of her son, Micah. His smile was still the same, the missing front tooth, the light in his eyes. But the note from the hospital lay beside it like a shadow. Surgery was scheduled for next week. The cost was more than she had saved in 2 years. She pressed her hand over the photo. We're close, baby, she whispered. Just a little longer. She didn't know that upstairs, Alexander Waverly had already made a decision. In his study, the first light of morning spilled across his desk, illuminating the thick folder from the hospital. He had called them late the previous night after reading Naomi's file in the audit documents. Records of withheld pay, skipped medical coverage, denied insurance claims. Each line read like a quiet theft. Now he sat with the phone in his hand, his voice low and steady. Yes, the surgery will be covered. Use the foundation's medical outreach fund. No press, no announcement. The hospital coordinator hesitated. Mr. Waverly, should we list this as a company sponsorship? No, he said softly. List it as a correction. When he hung up, the silence felt lighter. For once, his wealth was being used not to decorate shame, but to repair it. Later that morning, Naomi came downstairs to deliver audit forms to Daniel Ortiz. He looked up from his laptop. "Good news," he said. "Your HR file's been reinstated, and your son's hospital's already been in touch. They confirmed payment's been processed." Naomi froze. "Payment?" Daniel nodded, a small smile forming. "Mr. Waverly arranged it. Anonymous donation through a foundation account." She felt her heart drop into her stomach. "He can't," Daniel interrupted gently. "It's not charity, Naomi. It's accountability." Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears away. "Still, I can't just accept it." "Then don't," he said. "Work for it. Help us finish this audit. Make sure no one else gets erased again." Naomi nodded slowly. "I can do that." When she went to thank Alex later, he was in the garden pruning the roses. The air was still damp from last night's rain. "I heard," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "You don't need to." "I do." She stepped closer. "You didn't have to do it." He finally met her eyes. "I did. Not because I pity you, Naomi, but because I failed you. I signed every payroll report without looking at what it hid." Her voice softened. "You didn't know." "That's the problem," he said. "I didn't know because I didn't look." They stood in silence for a moment. Birds sang from the hedges, ordinary and comforting. Naomi spoke first. "When Micah's better, I'll pay it back. Every dollar." He smiled faintly. "Then I'll take it. But only if you let me tell him I'm his first customer." She laughed, shaking her head. "He wants to be a doctor, not a businessman." "Good," Alex said. "Maybe he'll heal people faster than I heal mistakes." A week later, Naomi sat beside Micah's hospital bed. The room smelled of antiseptic and soft cotton. Machines hummed gently around him, each beep a fragile reminder of life holding on. He looked smaller than she remembered, his cheeks pale, his eyes bright but tired. "Mom," he whispered, "are you nervous?" She brushed his hair back. "A little." He smiled. "Don't be. The doctor said it's like fixing a clock." Her throat tightened. "Then you'll tick forever." He grinned weakly. "Promise?" "Promise." The nurse entered quietly, checking the monitors. "We're almost ready," she said. "It's a short procedure, and your son's a brave one." Naomi nodded, whispering a prayer under her breath. Outside the operating room, she waited for hours that felt like days. She paced the hallway, clutching Ruth's hand, listening to the rhythm of her own heartbeat echo against sterile walls. At one point, a janitor walked by humming a tune, a slow gospel hum that filled the corridor with warmth. Naomi closed her eyes and breathed it in. It reminded her that not all prayers are words. Some are simply endurance. When the doctor finally appeared, mask hanging from his neck, Naomi braced herself. "It went well," he said, smiling. "Your son's stable, he's going to be just fine." The world spun for a second, then settled. Naomi sank into the chair, her hands shaking as she whispered, "Thank you." That evening, rain began to fall again, a quiet drizzle tapping against the hospital window. Micah was asleep, breathing softly. Naomi sat beside him, watching the city lights blur behind the glass. The nurse brought her a blanket and smiled. "He's healing fast. Strong boy." Naomi smiled back. "He always was." Micah stirred slightly, his eyes half opening. "Mom?" "Yes, baby?" "Grass is green again." She froze. "What did you say?" He smiled drowsily. "You said once that the grass wasn't for us, but now it's green again." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She squeezed his hand gently. "Yes, baby. It's green. Again." Outside, lightning flickered in the distance, soft and silent, like the sky agreeing. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Alex sat in his office reviewing the first report from Daniel. It was thick with missing records and handwritten corrections. Entire years of erased names, unpaid bonuses, unsigned evaluations. Each page felt like a confession written in ink. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We'll fix everyone," he murmured. Daniel nodded. "This isn't just an audit anymore. It's history." "Then let's start rewriting it," Alex said. He looked out toward the garden, now shimmering under soft rain. Somewhere out there, the earth was growing again, quietly, like forgiveness. In the hospital, Naomi finally fell asleep beside her son, her head resting near his hand. Machines blinked in steady rhythm, a lullaby of recovery. For the first time in years, her dreams were gentle. She dreamed of the garden, not of hunger, but of sunlight. The same grass she once chewed in shame now brushed her fingertips softly, alive, forgiving, bright. Sometimes help is not a gift, but an apology that learns how to heal. And when a mother finally rests beside her child, even the rain outside knows it is safe to fall again. The storm that had rattled the city that night left behind a morning washed clean. The garden shimmered with dew, the air thick with the smell of wet soil. Inside the Waverly estate, however, the calm felt uneasy, as if the walls were holding their breath. In the library, Alexander Waverly sat with Daniel Ortiz, surrounded by stacks of files and boxes marked Archive, Staff Records. The audit had officially begun. Naomi's name was now a reference point, her case the thread that began to unravel everything. Daniel flipped through the folders carefully. "Half of these are copies," he said. "The originals must have been removed years ago. Look here. Whole lines of staff history erased. Not fired, not transferred, just gone." Alex leaned over the desk, scanning the faint handwriting. "Who were they?" Daniel shook his head. "No way to know, unless someone remembers." Alex exhaled heavily. "Then we ask." That afternoon, Naomi returned from the hospital, her face pale with exhaustion but carrying the quiet joy of relief. Micah's surgery had gone well. The doctor said he'd recover fully. Ruth Gardner met her at the door with open arms. "He's all right?" Naomi smiled. "He's sleeping, stronger already." "Then so are you," Ruth said, guiding her toward the kitchen. "Sit. You look like you've been carrying the moon." Naomi chuckled softly. "Feels like it. What's been happening here?" Ruth lowered her voice. "The audit's stirring ghosts. Daniel's finding names that disappeared before even I started, and that was 30 years ago." Naomi frowned. "You think Vivian had something to do with it?" Ruth hesitated. "She didn't erase. History alone. Old money does that like breathing. It forgets inconvenient people." Upstairs, Vivian Langford stood before the large family portrait that hung in the hallway. It showed her husband's grandfather, a stern man in a gray suit, surrounded by servants who were painted more like shadows than people. Their faces barely visible, their posture obedient. Vivian's eyes lingered on the painting's edge, where a faint signature read, "Commissioned 1954. Something about it unsettled her now. She had spent her life defending traditions she'd never questioned. But the foundation beneath those traditions was beginning to shake, and she could feel the cracks spreading beneath her feet. Her phone buzzed. A message from Martin Grayson. "Audit findings going public. Suggest damage control immediately." She typed back, "Handle it." But her hands trembled as she placed the phone down. The truth was too big to handle now. Downstairs, Alex and Daniel were still at work when Naomi joined them. She glanced at the open boxes, her eyes widening. "These are all records?" Daniel nodded. "What's left of them?" Alex handed her a yellowed payroll sheet. "Does any of this look familiar?" Naomi studied the faded ink. The names blurred together, but one caught her eye. "Sarah Dawson," she whispered. Ruth, who had just entered with tea, froze. "What did you say?" "Sarah Dawson," Naomi repeated. "There's a note beside her name. Relocated. No forwarding address." Ruth's eyes glistened. "Lord, I haven't heard that name in 40 years. "Who was she?" Alex asked gently. Ruth took a slow breath. "She worked here when I was just a teenager. Quiet, like Naomi. She was kind. Always wore a silver cross around her neck. Then one week, she was gone. No goodbye, no letter. The others said she ran away." Daniel frowned. "Or someone made her disappear." The words hung in the room like dust that refused to settle. As the afternoon deepened, Naomi climbed up to the attic to help search for older journals. The air was thick and heavy with years of neglect. Old furniture stood like sentinels covered in white sheets. Light seeped through the small circular window, revealing floating specks of dust. She found a trunk labeled House Journal 1940-1965. The leather was cracked, the lock rusted. When she pried it open, the hinges groaned like something waking from sleep. Inside were handwritten logs, lists of daily tasks, expenses, birthdays, and reprimands. Pages upon pages of routine, written in elegant but detached handwriting. Then, halfway through the book, pages were torn out. Naomi's fingers brushed the ragged edges. Someone had removed entire months. On the next intact page, a single line was written in smaller, sharper handwriting. "Discipline completed. SD to be forgotten." Her chest tightened. "SD," she whispered. "Sarah Dawson." Footsteps echoed behind her. It was Ruth, climbing slowly, her hand gripping the rail. "Ruth," Naomi said, voice trembling. "You need to see this." Ruth adjusted her glasses, leaning closer. When she read the words, she pressed a hand to her mouth. Good Lord, they didn't just erase her. They buried her story. Naomi closed the book gently. "Then we'll dig it back up." That night, the mansion was restless. The air felt heavier, the wind pressing against windows as if trying to listen. Vivian moved through the dark halls, flashlight in hand. She had seen the lights in the attic earlier, and her curiosity, or perhaps fear, drove her upward. When she reached the top, the trunk lay open, the journal resting on the table under the weak glow of a single lamp. She turned a few pages, her pulse quickening. Then she saw it. The same line, SD to be forgotten. Vivian's breath caught. She whispered to herself, "What did you do, grandfather?" For the first time, she wasn't angry at Naomi or Alex. She was terrified of her own reflection in the story she'd spent her life defending. She closed the journal quickly, her hands trembling. Downstairs, she heard footsteps approaching, the steady rhythm of Alex's shoes. "Vivian," he called. She turned off the flashlight and stepped back into the shadows. "Nothing, Alex," she said too quickly. "Just checking the old wiring." He appeared at the top of the stairs, his face tired but searching. "You shouldn't be here alone. The floorboards are unstable." She forced a smile. "I'll leave you to your ghosts." As she walked past him, she whispered under her breath, "You're not the only one they haunt." When Alex was alone, he lifted the journal from the table and stared at the torn pages. The silence of the attic pressed around him, thick and suffocating. He whispered, "Sarah Dawson, who were you?" A faint creak came from behind the far wall, followed by a soft, hollow echo. It sounded like something, or someone, still trapped inside. He placed a hand against the wall. Cold air seeped through a narrow crack near the baseboard. "Daniel," he called downstairs, "bring a flashlight and tools. We're opening this section tomorrow." Below him, the house seemed to exhale, as though it knew what was coming. Truth sleeps beneath dust and good intentions, but time has a way of loosening floorboards, and when it does, every erased name begins to whisper again. Morning light crept into the attic like a secret it wasn't ready to tell. Dust drifted through narrow beams, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and age. Alexander Waverly stood at the wall where he'd felt the draft the night before. A single crack ran across the wooden paneling, thin but certain, like a scar that refused to fade. Daniel Ortiz arrived minutes later, toolbox in hand. "You sure about this?" he asked. Alex nodded. "If there's something behind this wall, I need to know what it is." Naomi Fields and Ruth Gardner stood nearby, watching silently. Vivian hadn't come upstairs yet. She had barely spoken since reading the journal. The house felt like a lung that had forgotten how to breathe. Daniel tapped lightly along the wall. The hollow echo came again. He nodded. "There's space behind here." They worked carefully, prying loose the old panels one by one. Nails screeched softly as they gave way. Dust filled the air, and for a moment, it was hard to tell if the chill that swept through the room came from the open gap or from what they were about to uncover. When the last board fell away, everyone froze. Behind the wall was a narrow corridor no more than 3 feet wide, hidden between the attic and the outer wall. A weak light bulb hung from a rusted wire. The air inside was cold and dry, the kind of air that remembers silence for too long. Alex stepped inside first, flashlight cutting through the dark. "Careful," he whispered. Ruth followed, clutching her cross necklace. Naomi hesitated at the entrance, her fingers trembling. She could feel something heavy in that air. Memory, sorrow, maybe both. The beam of the flashlight slid across the walls, revealing peeling wallpaper, a small iron cot, a cracked mirror, and beside it, a chipped bowl and cup coated in dust. And on the far wall, carved deep into the stone, were 2 letters, SD. For a long time, no one spoke. Ruth was the first to find her voice. "Sarah Dawson." Naomi swallowed hard. "They locked her here." Daniel's voice was quiet. "It looks like a confinement room." In the early 20th century, large estates sometimes contained hidden servant quarters or isolation rooms, small spaces used to separate staff who were ill, disobedient, or accused of theft. Few records survived. Most owners denied they existed at all. The narrator's voice softened around the fact, gentle but haunting. Some secrets weren't forgotten. They were hidden until the walls themselves learned to lie. Alex crouched by the cot, his hand brushing the rusted frame. "This wasn't just neglect," he said. "This was imprisonment." Naomi's eyes filled, but she kept her voice steady. "All those names that vanished, maybe this is where they ended." Ruth crossed herself silently. "Lord have mercy." Downstairs, Vivian heard the footsteps above her. Her hands trembled around her teacup. She knew they'd found something. She could feel it in the way the house itself had gone quiet. When she finally climbed the stairs, her heels clicked against the wood like a metronome for her heartbeat. She stopped at the attic doorway. "What is this?" she asked, her voice low, almost reverent. Naomi turned toward her. It's Sarah Dawson's room. Vivian blinked, disbelief turning to horror. That's impossible. My grandfather, he was strict, yes, but... Alex interrupted softly. Vivian, he built this house, and this was part of it. Vivian's lips trembled. He told me it was a storage alcove. He said servants spread rumors. Naomi stepped forward, holding the old journal. He wrote it down himself. Discipline completed. SD to be forgotten. Vivian's eyes widened as she took the book, reading the words for herself. She backed away, whispering, He said those stories were exaggerations. He said our family treated people like family. Ruth spoke quietly. Families don't lock their own behind walls. The words hit like a bell in an empty church. Vivian pressed her palm against the stone initials. They were carved deep, the grooves worn smooth by time. She traced them as if they could answer her. Sarah Dawson, she murmured. I remember my grandmother mentioning her name once. She said she left suddenly after causing trouble. Naomi's voice cracked slightly. Her trouble was probably asking for dignity. Vivian closed her eyes. A single tear rolled down her cheek before she could stop it. All this time I thought I was protecting our name, but maybe I was protecting our guilt. Alex placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Now we face it. She nodded slowly. Yes, we face it. Daniel began taking photos for documentation. We'll need to report this to the Labor Bureau and the Historical Society, he said quietly. This space is evidence of unlawful confinement. It may even fall under federal preservation laws. Alex nodded. Then let's preserve it, for truth, not tradition. Naomi looked around the narrow corridor, the shadows hugging the edges. People should see this, she said. They should know what silence looks like. Her words hung in the air, both prayer and promise. Later that day, Naomi filmed a short video on her phone. She didn't stage it, didn't prepare lines. She simply stood inside the small room, holding the camera steady. Her voice was calm but resonant. This is where Sarah Dawson lived, or was kept, she said. She worked for a house that pretended to be perfect. They called this a home, but homes don't need locks. She paused, her eyes glancing toward the carving. To everyone who's ever been told to stay quiet, this is what quiet built. Don't let it stand forever. She uploaded the video that evening. By sunrise, it had been shared thousands of times. Within hours, journalists and advocates were calling it the room that spoke. The public demanded answers. The Waverly name, once synonymous with charity, was now tied to history's buried truth. Vivian stayed away from the cameras, but she didn't hide the truth either. Let them come, she told Alex. It's time the world saw what our walls have been hiding. That night, Naomi returned to the garden. The moon was full, silver light washing over the same patch of grass where everything had begun. She knelt, not out of shame this time, but gratitude. Ruth joined her, holding a candle. For Sarah, she said softly. Naomi lit a second candle beside it. For everyone who never got to speak. The flames danced gently, reflected in their eyes. From the attic above, a faint wind stirred the open corridor, carrying with it the sound of shifting wood and the quiet creak of release. Like the house itself was exhaling for the first time in decades. Walls forget faces, but they never forget sounds. One cry, one prayer, one truth whispered into stone, it all waits to be found. And when it is, the silence that once buried it begins to breathe again. The morning after the video went viral, The Waverly estate no longer felt like a private home. Cars lined the long driveway, reporters, historians, and lawyers moving in quiet waves. The air buzzed with curiosity and outrage. Inside, Alex and Naomi walked through the corridor that had once been hidden, now cleared and lit by temporary lamps. It no longer smelled of dust. It smelled of memory and reckoning. Every corner whispered something unfinished. Vivian Langford stood near the carved initials SD, her face pale but calm. She had spent the night there, refusing interviews, sitting on the old iron cot like a woman waiting for judgment. When Naomi entered, she looked up. "They keep asking me for statements," Vivian said quietly, "but I don't know what to say. Every word feels too small." "Then don't explain," Naomi answered softly. "Just tell the truth." Vivian nodded faintly. "That's the hardest part." Later that morning, Daniel Ortiz arrived with a new set of documents, architectural blueprints and estate inventories dating back to the 1940s. "Something's missing," he said, spreading them across the long dining table. "There's an entire section of the East Wing that doesn't match the current layout. The records mention training quarters." "Training?" Alex repeated. Daniel's expression darkened. "That's what they called it. In reality, it was an isolation wing used for disciplinary correction. The records were destroyed in the 70s. Vivian closed her eyes, whispering, "My grandfather built that." "Yes," Daniel said, "and I think there's still more here. See this? The plans show a storage area beneath the corridor, sealed off decades ago." Naomi leaned over the blueprints. "Beneath the room?" "Exactly." Alex stared at the drawings, the lines faint and faded. "Let's find out what he buried." They gathered a small crew, Daniel with tools, Ruth with gloves, Naomi with determination that felt heavier than fear. Vivian followed quietly, almost as if seeking penance through witness. In the narrow corridor, Daniel knelt and tapped the floorboards. One section gave a hollow sound. "Here," he said. "Something's beneath this." Naomi crouched beside him. "What do you think it is?" "Let's find out." The boards were old and stubborn, but after careful work, one came loose. Beneath it lay a shallow compartment wrapped in oilcloth, its edges darkened with time. Daniel lifted it gently, placing it on the cot. Inside were two objects, a small metal box and a folded envelope labeled Confidential Waverly Archive. Alex opened the envelope first. It contained a short note in elegant handwriting. "For internal review only. Audio documentation retained for training and discipline purposes." He frowned. "Audio documentation?" Daniel nodded. "It means recordings." They opened the metal box. Inside, neatly stacked, were several reel-to-reel tapes, their labels written in the same hand. Servant Conduct, Case 14. Disciplinary Reflection, 1954. Waverly Compliance Sessions. A shiver passed through the room. Alex carried the tapes downstairs to the library where an old player still worked. Dust puffed into the air when he turned the switch. The machine hummed to life, its reels spinning slowly, the ribbon trembling like it still remembered the voices it had captured. Naomi sat across from him, her hands clenched in her lap. Vivian remained near the doorway, unable to sit. The first tape crackled, then began with a man's voice, firm, controlled, eerily polite. Session 12, March 3, 1954. Subject, SD Compliance Review. The voice paused. A faint sound followed. Footsteps, a chair scraping, and then a soft, trembling breath that didn't belong to the man. "Miss Dawson," the voice continued, "you were instructed not to speak with guests. Why did you disobey?" A woman's voice, weak, shaking, answered, barely audible. "I only said the tea was cold, sir." A slap echoed, then silence. "This will teach you humility," the man said calmly. "You will remain in isolation for 1 week." The tape hissed, the sound of static swallowing what came next. Vivian's hand flew to her mouth. "That's his voice," she whispered. "My grandfather." Alex stopped the tape. The silence that followed was unbearable. Naomi's eyes glistened. She was punished for speaking? Ruth nodded slowly. "The help weren't supposed to have opinions." Alex pressed play again. The second tape began. Disciplinary reflection, April 21st. Subject has remained quiet. No further disruptions. Records to be sealed. The man's tone was casual, almost administrative. Naomi whispered, "He thought silence was obedience." Vivian turned away, tears streaking her face. "I grew up thinking he was a hero, a self-made man. He gave sermons about fairness, She stopped, choking on the word. Alex said quietly, "Even the cruel think they're righteous when no one's listening." Daniel took notes for documentation, his expression grim. "These tapes are more than history. They're evidence." Naomi looked at the spinning reels, then let them speak. In historical labor investigations, recovered audio or written confessions from estate owners often serve as both legal evidence and educational material, revealing systemic exploitation that words alone could not describe. The narrator's tone deepened, like a lullaby with teeth. Sometimes, truth hides not in silence but in echoes too long ignored. By late afternoon, they had listened to every tape. The last one was shorter, just a man's weary voice muttering, "Legacy depends on obedience. Without it, order collapses." And then faintly, another voice, young, frightened, whispering, "Sir, please, I just wanted to see the garden." The tape ended with a click. No one spoke for a long while. The garden outside rustled under a gentle breeze, as if responding to the woman's final plea. Naomi stood slowly. "She wanted to see the garden," she said. "The same garden I ate from." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. All she wanted was sunlight. Vivian whispered, "And I spent my life closing the blinds." Alex looked at them both. "We'll make this public. Every word. No edits." Vivian nodded through her tears. "Do it." That night, they gathered in the library again. The lamps glowed low, the air warm and still. Alex pressed record on a new tape, a modern one. His voice came soft but resolute. October 5th, 2025. Statement for the record. This house has carried the weight of silence for generations. Today, we let it speak. He paused, glancing toward Naomi. She stepped forward and spoke into the microphone. "My name is Naomi Fields. I am not a servant of this house. I am its witness." Vivian added softly, "And I am its heir learning how to apologize." The new tape clicked softly as it recorded their words, an echo rewritten in gentler tones. Outside, the night wind moved through the trees, carrying the sound of forgiveness where once there had only been command. When walls speak, they do not whisper, they remember. Voices trapped in dust return not to haunt, but to heal. And sometimes, the truest inheritance isn't wealth, but the courage to play back the sound of your own wrongs and promise never to repeat them. By the next morning, the story had traveled farther than the Waverly family could have imagined. Television crews camped outside the gates. Online, the footage of Naomi Fields standing in the hidden corridor had been viewed more than 5 million times. The headline read, "The Room That Spoke: Hidden History in the House of the Billionaire." What had begun as a household scandal was now a national conversation. Commentators debated class, privilege, and the invisible lives that had kept wealth polished for generations. But through all the noise, one clip stood out. The moment Naomi's voice said softly, "Homes don't need locks." Inside the estate, the atmosphere was both chaotic and reverent. Reporters buzzed in the garden, drones hovered over the roof, and activists began leaving flowers by the gate with small, handwritten notes. For Sarah Dawson, for those who stayed unseen. Alex watched from the study window, his hands folded behind his back. "They're turning this into a movement," he murmured. Vivian stood beside him, pale and quiet. "A movement built on our shame. Or on our honesty," Alex said gently. She sighed. "You still believe in redemption, don't you?" He looked at her, his voice calm. "I believe in repair. Redemption is just repair that learned how to keep going." Naomi entered the room with Daniel Ortiz and Ruth Gardner, holding a folder of printed emails. "The press wants a statement," she said. "They're asking whether the family will open the house for investigation." "We already have," Alex replied. "But this needs to go beyond us. We're not just talking about one family's past. We're talking about a pattern that still lives in other homes, other systems." Naomi nodded. "Then let's say that." Vivian turned toward her, hesitant. "You want to stand beside us? After everything?" Naomi's expression was calm, her tone steady. "If I stand alone, it'll look like a story about blame. If I stand with you, it becomes a story about change." For the first time, Vivian couldn't find an argument. That afternoon, they held a press conference in the front courtyard. A wooden podium had been set up beneath the grand oak tree, the same one under which Sarah Dawson's name had first been found carved into the wall. The air smelled of rain and soil, and the crowd stretched beyond the gates. Alex stepped up first, microphones glinting under cloudy sunlight. His voice carried through the speakers, low and even. "Generations ago, this estate was built on labor that was hidden and unheard. We didn't just inherit wealth, we inherited silence. Today, we're giving that silence back to the people it took from." He paused, letting the words settle. "The recordings we found will be released publicly to the Department of Labor and archived by the Historical Society for Educational Reform. This is not about erasing a name. It's about honoring those who were erased." Then he stepped back. The cameras turned to Naomi. She walked to the podium slowly, the crowd quieting. She wore a simple white dress and held no notes. When she spoke, her voice was steady, each syllable deliberate. "I ate grass once," she said, "because hunger felt safer than asking. I thought silence was respect. But silence is just hunger in another form." The crowd was still. She continued, her eyes meeting the audience. "I never wanted to shame anyone. I wanted to survive. But when truth began to speak, I realized surviving isn't enough. We have to make sure no one else starves in the shadows of comfort." Behind her, Ruth wiped a tear quietly. Daniel stood with his hands clasped, recording every word for the official file. Naomi's final line carried through the courtyard like a prayer. "We can't change what was buried, but we can plant something honest in its place." The crowd erupted into applause, soft at first, then thunderous, echoing against the mansion's stone walls. That night, the clip of Naomi's speech flooded every platform. Hashtags spread. Homes without locks. Sarah Dawson lives. Truth and voice. Celebrities reposted it. Schools began planning discussions about domestic labor, and civil rights groups reached out to collaborate. But for Naomi, the noise of fame felt distant. What mattered was quieter. She sat on the back steps of the house, watching the candles flicker in the garden where she once knelt in hunger. Micah's voice echoed faintly from inside, laughing with Ruth over a board game. That sound was worth more than any applause. Vivian joined her after a while, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one over without a word. Naomi accepted it. "You didn't have to." Vivian nodded. "Maybe not, but I needed to." They sat in silence, listening to the rain begin again. After a long pause, Vivian spoke softly. "My grandfather believed silence made a house respectable. I think I finally understand. He was afraid of what truth would sound like." Naomi smiled faintly. "It sounds like this." Vivian tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "People talking," Naomi said. "Different voices, even the uncomfortable ones." Vivian's eyes glistened. "Do you forgive me?" Naomi looked at her gently. "Forgiveness isn't a door. It's a garden. You don't walk through it, you tend it, one seed at a time." Vivian nodded, silent tears catching in the rain. Later that night, Naomi checked her phone one last time before bed. The screen showed a message from an unknown number. "Thank you for speaking. My grandmother worked here in the 1960s. Her name wasn't Sarah Dawson, but she told stories about the woman who disappeared. We never knew what happened. Now we do. JD." Naomi read it twice, then set the phone down. She whispered, "Sarah, you're not forgotten anymore." The next morning, a small ceremony was held in the garden. Reporters were not invited. Only the household staff, the Waverlys, and a few members of the local Workers' Alliance gathered under the oak tree. A new plaque had been installed near the base of the trunk. It read, "In memory of Sarah Dawson and every voice that worked in silence." Naomi stepped forward and placed a single white rose beneath it. Then, unexpectedly, Vivian joined her, kneeling beside her in the wet grass. The symbolism was quiet but powerful. The same posture once born of shame, now reborn as respect. Alex watched from a few steps away, his eyes damp but peaceful. For the first time, the house felt like a place worth belonging to. That night, the story continued to ripple outward. News anchors spoke of legacy, redemption, and truth. But in one small room of that vast estate, Naomi sat by the window, listening to Micah breathe softly as he slept. She smiled at the rhythmic sound, steady, alive, free. The wind outside carried the faint scent of rain and roses, the house no longer echoing with silence but with the sound of something new, peace learning how to stay. Some stories end in noise, headlines, applause, and fleeting attention. But true justice ends in quiet. The quiet of a house no longer haunted, a garden no longer hidden, a mother finally resting without hunger. That's how you know change has roots. The courthouse felt colder than it looked. The walls were the color of paper left too long in a drawer, and the ceiling lights hummed with the tired patience of places that had seen too many human storms. Outside, cameras throbbed like a restless sea. Inside, time slowed to the measured pulse of a clock that refused to run ahead or fall behind. Judge Evelyn Price presided with a gaze that seemed to know when a lie was about to be born. She wore no drama on her face, only attention. The room held its breath as the bailiff called the case, and every chair found its owner, and every owner remembered why they had come. On the evidence table lay 3 kinds of truth: a leather house journal with pages torn out and then found again, a stack of audit logs, neat and devastating, and a small player with reel-to-reel recordings that had turned the Waverly estate into a museum of its own past. The first witness called was Daniel Ortiz. He spoke the way careful people walk on ice, slow, precise, never wasting a step. He explained how records had gone missing, how wages had thinned at the edges without explanation, how complaints had been written and then absorbed by silence like rain into sand. "Do the records show intent?" the court asked. "They show repetition," Daniel answered. "And repetition is how intent behaves when it doesn't want to be seen." A murmur moved through the room and then dissolved as Judge Price lifted a hand. "Proceed." Next came the journal. The clerk read lines that sounded polite until you understood what they meant. Discipline completed. Subject to be forgotten. The words were elegant, like a dinner invitation. They hurt for that very reason. The recordings followed. The player clicked and the past walked in. A man's voice, calm and well-bred, described compliance, and a woman's voice, small and careful, asked for a different cup of tea. Then the terrible, unmistakable sound of a slap, thin, final, unforgettable. Even the microphone seemed to recoil. Someone in the gallery began to cry softly. Another person stood and left, unable to sit inside that sound. Judge Price waited for the tape to end before she spoke, and when she did, her voice was low. "Let the record reflect that the audio has been authenticated and entered into evidence." The room exhaled. Now it was Alexander Waverly's turn. He rose, taller than the moment wanted him to be, but somehow smaller inside it. His suit looked like anyone's armor. His voice, when it came, did not. "I built a company on the idea that technology can help people," he said. "I built a name on the idea that giving is the same as care. But I never went upstairs to the attic of my own house and asked it to tell me the truth. I thought a locked door meant order. It meant fear. I thought a clean ledger meant honesty. It meant erasure. I didn't know, but the not knowing was a choice I kept making." He lifted the journal with both hands. "This is my family's handwriting. The recordings are my grandfather's voice. The harm used my name. We can't fix what we won't face." Silence sat with him when he finished, the way a friend sits with grief. Then the cross-examination came, tidy and sharp. "Mr. Waverly," the attorney asked, "are you testifying against your own legacy?" "I'm testifying for my conscience," he said, "and for everyone who worked where the light didn't reach." From the gallery, a few heads nodded, quiet, almost secret, as if hope was a contraband worth smuggling. Naomi Fields watched from her seat, hands folded, spine straight. She did not speak yet. She didn't need to. Her presence made a kind of sentence all its own, a paragraph that explained everything without a single hard word. When she was called, the room softened, as if even the air understood that anger would be the wrong instrument. Naomi stood, steady as the line where sea meets shore. "Miss Fields," the attorney began, "do you claim that the Waverly family intended to harm you?" Naomi looked at the judge, then at the window where a square of daylight rested like a promise. "I claim that harm doesn't need intention to be real," she said. "It only needs permission, and silence is permission that has learned how to speak politely." "Why didn't you leave?" came the next question. "Because leaving is a luxury when your child needs surgery," she answered. "Because work, even when it hurts, still buys medicine. Because sometimes the only door open is the one that leads back inside." No one moved. Even pens stopped writing. Naomi went on, voice unshaken. "I am not here to humiliate a family. I am here to ask the law to remember people who were asked to disappear." And then something happened that courtrooms are not built to handle. The courage of one voice found its echo. An older man in the back row stood up, a former gardener, retired years ago. He asked to be sworn in. He told the court about names that faded from schedules and never returned, and about a corridor no one was allowed to clean. A woman who had served as a nanny in the 70s followed, her voice trembling but clear. She spoke of nights when footsteps were heard behind walls, and of a small cross that disappeared from a neck and was never seen again. Each testimony was a lantern. Together they made daylight. Judge Price let them speak. She did not hurry the clock. It was as if she understood that law is language, and language must listen before it decides what to say. In a brief pause, the court asked for context on remedies. The narrator, in the gentlest tone, explained what the room did not have time to. In other cases, when institutions have harmed workers in ways that left no simple receipt, courts have required restitution funds, pools of money set aside not as charity but as repair. They have also created registries and training requirements so that people who labor in private homes do not become invisible again. The words were plain, the edges softened for the ear. Examples the court remembered from cases before, not punishments, but paths back to dignity. By the afternoon's end, the evidence lay before the court like stones carried in from a river. Wet, heavy, undeniable. Judge Price closed the folder with a careful hand. "I have heard enough for today," she said. "This court will take the matter under advisement and reconvene for ruling." Her gavel fell once, not loud, but final. People stood in a hush. Some wiped tears. Some looked at the floor as if it too had a story to tell. Outside on the steps, microphones waited like open mouths, but Naomi and Alex did not stop. They walked past the cameras and into the late sun. Ruth joined them, small and certain, a lighthouse in human form. Vivian followed at a distance, her face stripped of performance. For once, she seemed grateful for the quiet that did not need to be controlled. On the sidewalk, Naomi paused. A child passing with his mother pointed to her and whispered, "That's the lady who made the house talk." Naomi smiled, touched the child's shoulder lightly, and kept walking. The day had not given them a verdict. It had given them something harder won, the knowledge that truth, once spoken, does not go back to sleep. Evidence is a kind of sunrise. It does not argue with the night. It simply keeps arriving. And when it does, even the shadows must choose what they are willing to hide. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and coffee when they returned the next morning. Reporters filled the front steps again, umbrellas blooming like dark flowers in the rain. But inside the courtroom, there was no noise, only the sound of chairs sliding, whispers dying, and hearts waiting. Judge Evelyn Price entered without announcement. She carried no notes, no visible emotion, only the verdict. Naomi Fields sat between Ruth Gardner and Daniel Ortiz, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, Alexander Waverly rested his elbows on the table, his expression quiet but unflinching. Vivian Langford sat beside him, fingers laced together so hard they had turned white. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Before I read my decision," she began, "I would like to say something about silence." Her voice filled the room, not loud, but resonant. The law recognizes words, contracts, testimony, confessions, all written in ink or spoken aloud. But there is another kind of record, the things we allow to happen without speaking. That silence builds walls taller than law. Today we take down one of those walls. She lifted the folder before her. The pages rustled softly like breath. This court finds that the Waverly estate engaged in systemic mistreatment of domestic workers, perpetuated by policies of exclusion and unlawful confinement in prior generations. Evidence includes written documentation, corroborating testimony, and verified audio recordings. The court acknowledges that while current management initiated reform, the legal and moral debts of the past remain. She looked toward Alex and Vivian. Therefore, I order the following. First, creation of a restitution fund to compensate verified descendants of workers employed or wrongfully confined on this estate. Second, establishment of a national domestic workers registry modeled on existing occupational safety databases to ensure transparent employment and grievance procedures in private households. Third, formal preservation of the Waverly estate as a historic site for education and remembrance under the designation of the Sarah Dawson Learning Center. She paused, letting the weight of the words fall. This ruling does not seek punishment. It seeks repair. The courtroom stayed utterly still. Then the judge's tone softened. And finally, let it be known that this decision stands as precedent for all future cases involving private domestic labor. The law will no longer look away. She lowered her papers. That is my ruling. For a long, impossible moment, no one moved. The sound of rain against the windows filled the room like applause too gentle to disturb the quiet. Naomi exhaled, her eyes blurring. Ruth reached over, squeezing her hand. Vivian's lips parted, but no words came. She sat frozen, her gaze on the table as if seeing through it, seeing decades, generations, everything buried. Alex turned to her slowly. She whispered, "I was blind." Naomi heard it and replied softly, without bitterness, "Now you see." Vivian covered her face, her shoulders trembling. Judge Price rose to leave, but paused at the door. She looked toward Naomi. "Miss Fields," she said quietly, "you once told this court that hunger was safer than asking. You've proved that asking is safer than silence." Naomi bowed her head slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge nodded once and stepped away, leaving the sound of her footsteps trailing like punctuation at the end of a long, necessary sentence. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky broke open in streaks of gray and gold, the kind of light that arrives only after storms have done their work. The crowd waited on the courthouse steps. Cameras pointed like a forest of mirrors, but no one spoke yet. They seemed to sense that this was not a story to be shouted first. Naomi stepped out beside Alex, the wind tugging gently at her coat. "What now?" he asked quietly. She looked up at the light filtering through the clouds. "Now we plant." Back inside, Vivian stood alone for a moment in the empty courtroom. The room had already begun to empty, but she lingered, her hand resting on the back of the chair where Naomi had sat. The leather was still warm. She turned toward the judge's bench and whispered to no one, "I used to think grace was inherited. Now I know it's learned." Her reflection in the polished wood looked older, humbler, human. She left the courtroom without makeup, without armor. Later that afternoon, the Waverly family's legal counsel held a small press briefing outside the courthouse. Microphones lined the podium, but the moment belonged to Alex. "I don't stand here as a businessman today," he said, his voice clear, unwavering. "I stand here as someone who inherited silence and is done living in it. The decision handed down is not a loss. It's an answer to a question our family avoided for too long. What is wealth worth if it costs dignity?" He looked at Naomi beside him. "The law has spoken, but justice is a daily job. We intend to do the work." Naomi didn't speak to the cameras. She didn't have to. Her presence was already an answer the world understood. Behind the crowd, Ruth held an umbrella over Micah, who had just arrived with Daniel from the hospital. The boy's scar had faded into a thin silver line. He tugged at Ruth's sleeve. "Is my mom famous now?" Ruth smiled. "Maybe, but I think she'd rather be useful." Micah grinned. "Then she's both." That evening, a warm light spread through the mansion's halls. Electricians had restored the wiring during the audit, and for the first time in decades, every lamp and corridor glowed at once. The shadows that once ruled the corners were gone. Naomi stood in the doorway, watching as Vivian walked through the rooms slowly, turning on each switch with careful hands. "It's brighter than I remember," Vivian said softly. "That's because you're looking," Naomi replied. Vivian smiled faintly. "Do you forgive me?" Naomi hesitated. "I think forgiveness isn't a word you say once. It's something you keep doing." Vivian nodded. "Then I'll keep doing it." They stood together in the hallway, the ceiling lights gleaming above them, the golden reflection stretching across the floor like a new beginning. Upstairs, Alex watched from the landing. For the first time since the day he saw Naomi in the garden, the house didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a place still capable of growing. He whispered to himself, "We can't fix what we won't face." The words, once a confession, now sounded like a vow. Outside, the garden shimmered in the twilight. Rainwater pooled on the leaves, each droplet catching the reflection of the house lights. Small mirrors of truth scattered across the earth. Justice does not roar. It arrives like light, quiet, persistent, finding the corners that shame forgot. And when it fills a room completely, even those who once lived in darkness can see their own hands again. The morning air carried a stillness that felt almost ceremonial. The world had already heard the verdict, but today was the day it would listen to the voices behind it. A small stage had been built on the courthouse lawn, framed by white tents and a backdrop that read, "Truth and Voice, Restoring Dignity Through Action." The crowd stretched down the steps and into the street. Students, domestic workers, advocates, reporters, and ordinary citizens who had followed the story like it was both tragedy and scripture. Cameras hummed like quiet bees. At the center of the stage stood Naomi Fields and Alexander Waverly, side by side. Behind them sat Vivian Langford, Ruth Gardner, and Daniel Ortiz, each of them changed in ways that could not be measured by money or titles. The soft hum of microphones crackled to life. Alex stepped forward first. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice low but steady. "Yesterday the law spoke. Today we begin the work of living what it said." He took a slow breath, scanning the crowd. "Our family has spent generations building walls. Walls of wealth, of fear, of silence. But when walls break, you can either rebuild them higher or use the stones to build something else. We choose the second." Applause rippled gently through the audience. Alex continued. "As part of the court's order, we are establishing the Sarah Dawson Foundation, Truth and Voice. It will serve as both a historical archive and a support network for domestic workers nationwide. Its mission is simple: to make sure no one's labor, story, or name ever disappears again." He turned toward Naomi. "But this foundation would not exist without the courage of one person. Miss Fields, would you join me?" Naomi stepped to the microphone. The murmurs quieted instantly. Her dress was simple, her hands calm, but her eyes carried the weight of everything that had come before. The attic, the journal, the recordings, the trial, the garden. She looked out at the sea of faces and began softly. "I ate grass once." A collective hush spread through the crowd. Cameras froze mid-pan. Naomi's voice was gentle, steady as if she were telling a story by candlelight. "I ate grass once because silence had locked every door, because hunger felt safer than asking. But today I plant seeds where that silence grew." Applause thundered, but she raised a hand for quiet. "This story isn't mine alone. It belongs to every worker who cleaned rooms they couldn't afford to sleep in, to every mother who cooked food she wasn't allowed to taste, to every name written in pencil so it could be erased easily." Her eyes swept across the crowd, finding the reporters, the workers, the students. The foundation isn't about charity. It's about memory. It's about making sure that when we say someone's name, it stays said. Vivian watched from her chair, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. She clutched a small silver cross around her neck, the same one that had once belonged to Sarah Dawson, retrieved from the hidden corridor and polished clean. As Naomi spoke, Vivian's mind replayed her grandfather's voice from the recordings. Cold, certain, untouchable. She pressed the cross tightly in her hand, as if to silence it. When Naomi finished, Vivian stood without planning to. The microphones turned toward her instinctively, but she didn't go to the podium. She just spoke from where she stood. "I used to think apology was weakness," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "But I've learned that silence is the real weakness. I can't change what my family did, but I can listen, and I can help." The crowd clapped softly, respectfully. Naomi turned toward her, meeting her eyes. They exchanged no words, but in that quiet exchange, forgiveness took one more small step forward. After the speeches, a table was brought forward where the founding documents of the Sarah Dawson Foundation waited to be signed. The papers were printed on thick cream stock, each signature line bordered by gold ink. Alex signed first, then Vivian, then Ruth, Daniel, and finally Naomi. When Naomi's pen touched the paper, the crowd began to applaud again, but this time the sound felt different, less like celebration and more like release. The signing completed what the trial had begun, turning pain into purpose. After the conference, smaller interviews followed. A reporter asked Naomi, "Do you see yourself as a symbol of change?" She smiled faintly. "No, ma'am. I see myself as proof that change is already possible. The real work belongs to everyone who keeps listening." Another reporter turned to Alex. "What happens next for the Waverly estate?" "It becomes what it should have always been," he said. "A place of learning. A place where the past isn't buried under carpet and paint, but spoken of with respect." A child in the front row raised a hand timidly. "Miss Naomi, did the house really talk?" She laughed softly. "Yes, sweetheart, it did, but not with words. It talked when people finally started listening." That night, every major network replayed the speech. Clips of Naomi saying, "I ate grass once," opened every newscast. Commentators called it the sentence that redefined dignity. Social media flooded with hashtags. Seeds of Voice, Sarah Dawson Foundation, Homes Without Locks. The foundation's website crashed within hours from the flood of visitors. Donations poured in, not from corporations first, but from ordinary people. Domestic workers from across the country sent small notes. "I cleaned in silence for 12 years. I'm done being invisible. For Sarah Dawson, for my grandmother." Naomi read each message slowly, her heart heavy and light at the same time. Vivian watched from her own home, the glow of the television reflecting in her eyes. She whispered, "Let the world keep saying her name." A week later, Naomi and Alex walked again through the garden. New roses had been planted where the soil had once been bare. A brass plaque had been placed near the fountain, engraved simply, "The Sarah Dawson Foundation, where silence grows into voice." Naomi knelt to adjust a small stem that had bent under the wind. "They'll bloom soon," she said quietly. Alex smiled. "It's fitting, isn't it? We started with grass." Naomi looked up. "And we're ending with roots." He nodded. "No, we're beginning with them." They stood there for a while, watching the sun set across the water. The air smelled of rain and roses and something new, possibility. Words can build walls, but they can also plant gardens. When truth is spoken in the open air, it doesn't wither, it takes root. And every time someone remembers a forgotten name, a new flower learns how to bloom. The City Hall auditorium smelled faintly of coffee, pencil shavings, and possibility. Rows of chairs had been set in a circle, no stage, no podium, just people, eye level, equal. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Sarah Dawson Foundation, Listening Session, Week 1. Naomi Fields sat quietly in the back before the event began. She had insisted there be no microphones, no cameras, no hierarchy. "The first thing silence needs," she had said, "is a room that listens back." Now, as participants began to file in, housekeepers, caregivers, nannies, doormen, Naomi rose and greeted each one with a handshake or a hug. The hum of voices filled the space, soft but alive. Ruth Gardner stood by the refreshment table, pouring coffee into paper cups. "It's strange," she murmured. "So many years working behind closed doors, and now we're the ones opening them." Naomi smiled. "That's the sound of progress, Ruth. It creaks a little, but it opens." The session began with no introduction, only a shared moment of stillness. People shifted in their seats, uncertain, then gradually relaxed into the quiet. Naomi broke it gently. "We're not here to fix the past," she said. "We're here to name it, so it can stop hiding in the dark." A woman with streaks of gray in her hair spoke first. Her name was Clarice. She had cleaned hotel rooms for 20 years and private homes for 10 more. "They called me girl until my hair turned silver," she said. "When I complained, they said, 'We didn't mean it that way.' But every day I carried that word home like dust in my clothes." The room stayed silent, not the uncomfortable kind, but the reverent kind. Naomi nodded slowly. "You can leave it here if you want," she said softly. "We'll keep it safe until you don't need to carry it anymore." Next, an older man named Raphael spoke in a voice lined with fatigue. "I came from Honduras. I built fences around other people's gardens. My hands remember every nail, every splinter, but no one remembers my name." A young woman beside him whispered, "We do now." He looked up, startled, then smiled. A small, shy smile, as if the words themselves were medicine. Naomi watched, heart steady, eyes warm. She didn't interrupt, didn't take notes. She simply listened, the way rain listens when it touches the earth. In many worker advocacy models, listening circles are used to rebuild dignity before policy. Participants share experiences while facilitators focus on empathy, not outcome. It transforms testimony from a performance into a collective act of healing. The narrator's voice brushed through the moment softly, reminding the listener that change does not always start with law. It often starts with a chair, a story, and someone willing to listen. Halfway through the session, a woman Naomi recognized entered quietly. Vivian Langford. She wore no jewelry, no perfume, only a gray cardigan and humility. For a moment, the room hesitated. Some knew who she was, some didn't. Naomi smiled gently and gestured for her to sit. Vivian did. When her turn came, Vivian cleared her throat. My grandfather built a house and called it success. I defended it without knowing what it cost. I can't change that, but I can listen to the people who paid for it. Raphael nodded toward her. Then you're welcome here. Vivian blinked back tears. Thank you, she whispered. The circle felt smaller then, not because the room shrank, but because the distance between people had. After a break, Ruth gathered everyone for tea. Micah, now healthy and curious, handed out small cookies with his usual grin. My mom says these are peace offerings, he told one woman who laughed and hugged him. Naomi watched from the side, her heart full. He's learning faster than I did, she murmured. Alex Waverly stood quietly at the doorway. He didn't join the circle, didn't speak, didn't want credit. But when Naomi caught his eye, he nodded, a silent promise that his presence came without spotlight. She walked over. You're funding this quietly, aren't you? He shrugged. No one listens better when a billionaire is in the room. I'd rather they talk freely. Naomi smiled. That's the first lesson of equality. By the end of the afternoon, the session had turned into something softer, a choir of small voices rediscovering their strength. A man began humming an old folk tune. Others joined, weaving words into rhythm. Who keeps the house when no one sees? Who wipes the dust from histories? Who turns the lock and finds the key? The ones who stayed, the ones who breathe. The melody hung in the air, fragile and beautiful. Naomi closed her eyes and let it sink in. For the first time, she realized that the story wasn't hers anymore. It had become everyone's. As people left, they hugged longer than necessary. Clarisse pressed a folded note into Naomi's hand. It read, "Thank you for letting us speak before we die of silence." Naomi folded it carefully, slipping it into her pocket like a prayer. Vivian approached her at the end. I wasn't sure if I belonged here, she admitted. Naomi looked at her gently. If you came to listen, you belong. Vivian exhaled. Then I'll keep coming. That evening, the city lights shimmered through the windows as Naomi sat with Ruth and Micah, recounting the day. It's strange, she said, how healing doesn't sound like music or speeches. It sounds like people breathing easier. Ruth nodded. That's the rhythm of repair, baby. Slow but steady. Micah yawned, resting his head on her shoulder. Did everyone get to talk today? Everyone who wanted to, Naomi said softly. And you? Naomi smiled. I've said enough. Now I listen. Outside, the wind brushed through the streets, carrying the faint echo of laughter from the auditorium. Somewhere in that sound was the heartbeat of something new, the beginning of a movement that didn't need permission, only patience. When the world learns to listen, justice becomes less about verdicts and more about voices. And sometimes, the loudest revolution is the sound of people finally allowed to speak without fear. The Waverly estate no longer smelled of polish and power. It smelled of old books, waxed floors, and roses. Sunlight now reached places it never had before. Down stairwells, across banisters, through the corridor that once hid Sarah Dawson's initials. A small brass sign by the entrance read, "The Sarah Dawson Learning Center, where silence became story." Children's laughter echoed faintly from the garden. Tour groups moved quietly through the rooms. What had once been a house of whispers was now a living museum of memory. At the front door stood Naomi Fields, welcoming visitors with her calm smile. She wore a simple gray dress and a staff badge that read, "Curator of Voices." The title still made her blush. Ruth Gardner stood beside her, clipboard in hand. "Who would have thought," Ruth said, "this place would be a museum one day? When I started working here, the only thing they displayed was obedience." Naomi smiled gently. "Now we display the truth." The main hall had been transformed into a gallery of history and healing. The polished marble floors now held panels etched with names, workers who had once lived or labored on the estate. Some names had come from payroll records, others from handwritten letters, and some from word-of-mouth stories gathered during the Foundation's listening sessions. On one wall hung the recovered house journal, its torn pages now framed under glass. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Words can wound, but they can also teach." These pages are not shame. They are evidence of change. Opposite it hung a large mural painted by local art students, a depiction of Sarah Dawson standing in sunlight, holding open a door. Her expression was neither sorrowful nor triumphant, only peaceful. Naomi stood before the mural each morning before the doors opened, whispering, "We found you." Vivian Langford arrived just after noon, carrying a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She had aged gently in the past year, her once perfect hair now streaked with silver, her voice softer. "I brought something for the exhibit," she said, setting the bundle on a table. Naomi unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a silver tray engraved with initials, SD. "It was hidden in the pantry wall," Vivian explained. "My grandfather probably kept it as a reminder of his control. I think it belongs here now." Naomi nodded, her eyes moist. "You've given it back to her." Vivian smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm giving it back to all of us." Later, in the old dining hall, now renamed the Room of Conversations, Naomi led a small group of school children through the exhibit. They gathered around the table that once hosted lavish dinners, but now displayed letters from domestic workers across generations. A little girl raised her hand. "Miss Naomi?" she asked shyly. "Was this your house?" Naomi chuckled softly. "It was a house I worked in, yes, but now it belongs to everyone who wants to learn from it." The girl looked thoughtful. "So, it's a house that learned manners?" Ruth laughed from the doorway. "That's one way to put it, sugar." The group giggled, and the tension that usually hung in museums dissolved into warmth. Transforming former sites of injustice into educational spaces is a recognized practice in restorative history. Such places become not shrines to pain, but classrooms of empathy, preserving physical memory so that future generations understand the cost of silence. The narrator's tone softened as it explained. The Waverly estate had joined a global movement, turning the architecture of harm into spaces that teach care. Outside, the garden had become the heart of the museum. Winding paths led to benches inscribed with short quotes from listening sessions. "We're still here. Our stories breathe too. Silence isn't peace. It's a pause." In the center stood a stone fountain, surrounded by white and crimson roses. Vivian tended them daily. Visitors often saw her kneeling, trimming leaves, whispering softly as she worked. When asked why she did it herself, she'd smile and say, "Because redemption grows one bloom at a time." Naomi sometimes joined her. The two women rarely talked about the past anymore. They didn't need to. Their silence now was companionable, not fearful. Inside, Alex Waverly gave a quiet tour to a group of journalists. He pointed to photographs of the audit process, the court hearing, and the founding of the foundation. "This isn't a monument to guilt," he said. "It's proof that privilege can learn humility. My family's name was once a wall. Now it's a window. One reporter asked, "Do you ever feel judged for exposing your own legacy?" Alex smiled faintly. "If truth judges me, then I'm finally standing in the right courtroom." Later that afternoon, Naomi guided Vivian and Ruth into a newly opened section of the museum, the Garden of Voices. The room was dimly lit, lined with glass panels. Each panel contained a recorded testimony from domestic workers who had shared their stories through the foundation. Visitors could press a button and hear their voices, stories of struggle, humor, hope. A soft light glowed in the center, illuminating an inscription. Every whisper that survived became a song. Vivian pressed one button. A voice filled the air. A woman describing the first time she received a day off after years of 7-day shifts. Her laughter was bright, proud, unbroken. Vivian wiped a tear. "This room feels alive," she whispered. Naomi nodded. "It is. It's what Sarah's room should have been, a place where people are seen." Outside, Micah ran through the rose garden, his laughter echoing across the lawn. He paused near Vivian, waving. "Hi, Aunt Vivian." Vivian smiled at the name. It had started as a joke, Ruth's teasing, but Micah had adopted it wholeheartedly. She knelt beside him, brushing dirt from his knee. "You're getting tall." "I'm growing," he said proudly, "just like the roses." She chuckled softly. "Then you're part of the garden too." As dusk settled, the last visitors drifted away. Naomi locked the glass doors and walked through the quiet halls one final time. The rooms glowed faintly in the evening light. The portrait of Sarah Dawson placed near the staircase seemed to watch with a patient smile. Naomi paused before it. "We kept our promise," she whispered. Behind her, Vivian turned off the last lamp. The house fell into a peaceful half-darkness, not a silence of hiding, but of rest. Outside, the fountain murmured softly, blending with the sound of night wind through the roses. The house was breathing differently now. When a house remembers, it stops being a cage and becomes a keeper of stories. Redemption is not grand. It's slow hands pruning roses, a child's laughter in the hall, and the sound of doors staying open. 10 years had passed, but the morning light still touched the Sarah Dawson Learning Center in the same gentle way, spilling through the windows, warming the marble floors, catching dust motes that danced like small memories in the air. What had once been a mansion of silence was now a living classroom. Laughter echoed through the hallways. Children's footsteps replaced the hush of servants. The faint hum of voices told stories that no longer feared being heard. It was the 10th anniversary of the Sarah Dawson Foundation. The ceremony would begin at noon, and every room of the house was being readied for guests. Workers, students, journalists, and families whose lives had been changed by a movement that had started with one simple truth. Hunger should never be silent. In the garden, the roses had grown into a sea of color. Red, white, yellow, and a few wild pink blooms that Vivian insisted on planting. Just to remind everyone that imperfection is still beautiful. She was older now, her hands slower but sure. Every morning she trimmed the branches herself. A small plaque near the fountain bore her handwriting. "We learn to care for others by learning to care for what's still growing." Micah, now a tall young man with the same bright eyes as before, joined her with a watering can. "Need help, Aunt Vivian?" he asked. Vivian smiled, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. "You don't need to ask. You just do." He grinned. "That's what Mom says too." Naomi's voice carried from the veranda. "And I'm always right. Remember that." Micah laughed and turned back to the roses. "She's been saying that for years," he whispered. and Vivian chuckled. Inside, Naomi stood in the main hall, reviewing the ceremony program. Her hair had silvered gracefully, and the years had only deepened the calm in her eyes. The badge she wore no longer read Curator of Voices. It now read Director, Sarah Dawson Foundation. She glanced at the opening speech prepared by one of the staff writers, then folded it closed. "No," she murmured. "We'll speak from the heart." Ruth Gardner, still energetic despite her years, walked up behind her. "Skipping the script again?" Naomi smiled. "It's worked so far." Ruth grinned. "You'll give Judge Price a heart attack." "She retired 5 years ago," Naomi said gently. "But she's watching from home. She always sends roses on this day." Right on cue, a delivery boy entered carrying a bouquet of yellow roses with a note attached. "For the women who turned truth into law and law into kindness. EP." Naomi's eyes softened. She never forgets. At noon, the guests gathered in the garden under a white canopy. The wind carried the scent of roses and wet earth. A banner stretched overhead. 10 years of truth and voice. A string quartet began to play softly, their notes floating like light across the leaves. Alex Waverly stepped to the stage first. His hair had thinned and silvered, but his voice was as steady as ever. "When this house became a museum," he said, "some people called it an act of repentance. But it's not. It's an act of responsibility. Repentance ends with apology. Responsibility begins with action." Applause rippled gently through the crowd. He continued, "We've funded scholarships for over 5,000 domestic workers' children. We've documented 30 years of erased histories, and every week, new names are added to the wall, not as ghosts, but as teachers." Then he paused and turned toward Naomi. "And now, the woman who started it all." Naomi stepped up to the podium. The wind lifted her notes, but she didn't reach for them. Her voice carried easily, calm and warm. 10 years ago, I stood in a courtroom and told the truth about hunger. I didn't know it would reach this far. I only knew that silence had reached too far already." The crowd listened, still as prayer. "This garden," she continued, "was once a place where no one dared to walk freely. Today it's where children play. This house, once built to hide voices, now trains young people to listen. That's what healing looks like. It doesn't erase the past. It teaches it how to live differently." She paused, scanning the audience. Every person who ever worked unseen made this moment possible. If you ever folded laundry, cooked meals, cleaned floors, or kept a child safe while the world looked away, this day is yours. Her eyes shimmered in the sunlight. "We are the proof that quiet people can change loud systems." The applause began softly, then grew into a wave of sound that filled the air like music. After the speeches, the ceremony continued with a procession of children carrying small white candles. They walked to the wall of names, each one placing their candle beneath a plaque. Micah led the group, his candle steady despite the breeze. He stopped beneath Sarah Dawson's name and whispered, "Thank you." Beside him, Ruth dabbed at her eyes. "He's got your heart," she told Naomi. Long-term justice movements often evolve from policy into education. Memorial foundations like this one use rituals, candles, names, storytelling to teach empathy across generations. It's how history stays alive without repeating its harm. The narrator's voice flowed softly. The Learning Center was no longer just about the Waverlys or Sarah Dawson. It had become a living promise, proof that repair can outlive regret. As the sun began to set, the garden filled with golden light. Vivian stood by the fountain, trimming a single rose. Naomi joined her, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You know," Vivian said, "I used to think guilt was permanent, but it fades, doesn't it? Like shadows at dusk." Naomi smiled. "It doesn't fade, it transforms, like soil after rain." Vivian chuckled. "You always turn pain into poetry." "That's how I survived," Naomi said simply. They sipped their tea in comfortable silence. Around them, guests drifted away, laughter trailing behind like soft echoes. When the last visitor left, Naomi looked at the garden lights beginning to flicker on. 10 years, she whispered. "Feels like both forever and a blink." Vivian nodded. "That's how healing measures time." Later that night, after everyone had gone, Naomi walked alone through the hallways. Her footsteps echoed gently against the polished wood. The air was warm, filled with the faint hum of the fountain outside. She paused before the old portrait of Sarah Dawson, the one where Sarah's eyes seemed to follow every passerby. "Look what you started," Naomi whispered. "Look what you still are." A breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the smell of roses. For a moment, Naomi could almost imagine a voice answering, soft as breath. "I was never gone. You just had to listen." Time does not heal on its own. People do. They take what was broken, water it with care, and watch it bloom again. 10 years is not a finish line. It's the proof that truth, once spoken, knows how to stay alive. Morning unfolded slowly over the Sarah Dawson Learning Center, the air soft with dew, the light low and kind. The garden, once a battlefield of memory, now breathed in peace. Roses leaned toward the morning sun, their petals glistening. The fountain whispered continuously, the same rhythm it had kept for 10 years. Steady, forgiving, unafraid. Naomi Fields, now in her 70s, walked the gravel path with careful steps. Her cane tapped lightly in rhythm, each sound a heartbeat of the years she'd lived since that morning in the garden when everything began. Her hair had turned white, but her posture still carried quiet dignity. Children's laughter echoed from the distance. School groups visited the learning center every week now, and Naomi loved that the sound of joy had replaced the echoes of silence. She paused near the fountain. The small plaque beside it read, "For every voice once bent to the ground." She smiled, tracing the letters with a fingertip. "You'd like this, Sarah," she whispered. A few steps away, the benches were filled with early visitors. Retirees sipping coffee, students sketching the garden, and a tour guide telling the story gently for those who hadn't heard it before. "The woman who worked here once ate grass in this very garden," the guide said softly, "because she was forbidden to eat in the house. But instead of staying silent, she turned her hunger into a movement that fed the world with truth." Naomi chuckled under her breath. She had never grown used to hearing her own life turned into legend. When the guide noticed her, his eyes widened. "That's her," he whispered to the group. The students stared, awestruck. Naomi waved lightly. "Don't look so serious," she teased. "I'm not a statue." The children giggled. One brave girl asked, "Miss Naomi, was it really scary to speak up back then?" Naomi thought for a moment. "Yes, but I was more afraid of what would happen if I didn't." The girl nodded thoughtfully, as if storing the answer somewhere safe. Naomi continued her walk until she reached the far end of the garden, where a new section had been added, the Grove of Hands. It was an art installation made of bronze sculptures, hands of different shapes, sizes, and colors reaching upward, intertwined with real vines. Each sculpture had been cast from the hands of domestic workers who had attended the foundation's gatherings over the years. A small plaque beneath it read, "Built not to praise suffering, but to honor endurance." Naomi sat on the bench nearby, letting her hand rest against one of the bronze palms. It felt cool, strong. "You held the world together," she whispered. "You just never got the credit." Ruth Gardner had once said that these hands were the true architecture of history. Naomi believed it. Community memorial gardens are often designed with tactile elements, stones, sculptures, water, to invite reflection through touch. They act as living therapy, allowing visitors to connect physically with stories of resilience. Such spaces help transform memory into mindfulness. The narrator's tone softened. This garden wasn't built for tourists. It was built for breathing, for remembering without bitterness, for teaching that care itself is a kind of victory. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Talking to the statues again." Naomi looked up and smiled. It was Vivian Langford, now in her 80s, moving slowly with her walker but still wearing her trademark pearls. Fewer of them now, and all earned, none inherited. "Only to the polite ones," Naomi said. "The others interrupt." Vivian laughed and sat beside her. "You've aged gracefully, Naomi." "So have you," Naomi replied, "though I think the roses are jealous of your perfume." Vivian smiled. "You taught me that flowers bloom better when you listen to them. I never forgot." They sat in companionable silence, watching visitors move through the paths. Vivian spoke again, her voice softer. "Sometimes I still wake up at night and hear his voice. My grandfather's, I mean. For years I thought I'd never stop hearing him, but now I only hear the garden. It's louder." Naomi nodded. "That's how healing sounds. Not like silence, like peace you can hear." Vivian reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded photo. It was old and faded, a picture of Sarah Dawson's restored room, the initials SD shining faintly on the wall. "I keep this with me," Vivian said, "to remind myself that remembering isn't punishment, it's a promise." Naomi touched her arm gently. "Then you've kept your promise well." Across the garden, a young boy knelt near a rose bush, trying to plant a small seedling. His mother scolded softly. "Careful, you'll break it." Naomi called out kindly, "Let him try. Gardens forgive more than people think." The boy looked up, beaming. "I'm planting hope," he declared. Vivian laughed. "Then hope has a head start." The wind carried their laughter through the garden, rustling the leaves like applause. Later that afternoon, Naomi joined a group of volunteers preparing for the evening's memorial service. Once a year, on this same day, the foundation lit candles for every name still being discovered, workers whose lives had remained unrecorded until the Miyuanchai archives revealed them. As dusk settled, hundreds of candles were placed along the pathways, their flames swaying gently in the breeze. Visitors moved quietly, whispering prayers, memories, or simple thank yous. Naomi lit the first candle herself. "For Sarah," she said softly, "and for everyone who taught me that light doesn't ask permission." Vivian lit the second candle beside her. "For the ones who stayed silent because they had no choice." Together, they lit dozens more until the garden shimmered with gold. When the last candle flickered to life, Naomi stood back and took in the view. The fountain glowed under the reflection of hundreds of tiny flames. The roses looked like clusters of stars fallen gently to earth. Micah approached from behind, now wearing a foundation volunteer badge. "Mom," he said quietly. "It's beautiful." She smiled. "It's home." He slipped his arm around her shoulder. You built it. Naomi shook her head. No, we all did. Every hand, every story, every person who refused to stay forgotten. They stood there together in the fading light, surrounded by warmth, memory, and the soft hum of life continuing. As the evening deepened, Naomi sat alone for a final few minutes. The candles flickered, the fountain whispered, and the stars appeared one by one. She closed her eyes and let the air fill her lungs. The garden felt alive, not just with people, but with everything that had ever been spoken here. Somewhere beyond the sound of water, she could almost hear Sarah's voice again, faint but steady. You see, you turned silence into a garden. Naomi smiled through tears. No, she whispered. We turned it into a promise. A garden never forgets who planted it. Each leaf is a testimony, each petal a witness. And sometimes, the quietest place in the world is also the most alive, where every whisper once buried has learned to bloom. The morning sun slid through the tall windows of the Sarah Dawson Learning Center, brushing against the walls as though greeting an old friend. The house had grown quieter over the years, not empty, but peaceful, as if it finally understood that quiet could be chosen, not forced. The walls were different now. They wore their history openly, lined with photographs, letters, and panels of glass etched with short lines of poetry written by visitors. Each line was a memory that had decided to stay. Naomi Fields walked slowly down the main corridor, tracing her fingers along the cool marble. Every step was a conversation between her and the house. She no longer felt small within it. The ceilings no longer pressed down. The air no longer carried shame. Near the entrance, a plaque read, "Houses remember what we whisper. Gardens remember what we water." Naomi smiled softly at the words. She had written them herself, years ago, during one of the foundation's reflection retreats. She hadn't expected them to become the center's motto. But people seemed to like the simplicity, the way it made truth sound like something gentle you could hold in your hands. A new exhibit had just opened that week, The Rooms That Spoke. Each restored space of the house now told a story. Visitors could step into them, hear faint audio recreations of what once took place, and read testimonies that had been collected from living descendants of the workers. Naomi paused at the doorway of the old service corridor, the place that once held Sarah Dawson's initials. The doorframe gleamed now, its wood polished to a deep amber glow. A low speaker played a faint heartbeat sound, steady and soothing. A young guide named Aisha approached her. "Miss Naomi," she said softly, "we're ready to test the new projection for the visitor tour." Naomi nodded. "Go ahead." Aisha pressed a small button. The far wall lit up with a projected image of the attic room as it had once been, bare, small, dim. Then the light shifted, showing the same space now, open, airy, full of color and framed photos. Over it, Naomi's recorded voice played gently. "We once mistook silence for safety, but every brick remembers the breath that built it. Every floorboard remembers the feet that carried the weight of work." Visitors stopped as they passed, hushed and attentive. The sound wasn't dramatic, it was calm, rhythmic, and kind, like someone reading a lullaby written for truth itself. When the projection ended, Aisha turned to Naomi. "It still gives me chills," she said. Naomi smiled. "Then it's working." Across the hall, Vivian Langford sat in a small reading nook, now part of the exhibit called The Letters of Reckoning. Her walker rested beside her chair. She wore a pale blue sweater and a small pin shaped like a rose. Visitors often found her there, ready to answer questions. Some recognized her name immediately. the woman whose family had built the house and later helped transform it. A teenage boy approached her shyly. "Ma'am," he asked, "what made you decide to change everything?" Vivian looked up, her eyes bright. "Because silence is comfortable," she said, "until you realize who's paying for it. Once I understood that, comfort stopped feeling right." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing the words like medicine. Vivian smiled. "And you? What brings you here?" He shrugged. "My grandmother was a housekeeper. She passed last year. I guess I wanted to see a place that says people like her mattered." Vivian reached for his hand. "Then you're standing in the right place." Historical sites of reconciliation often use storytelling as education, inviting descendants of both harmed and harming parties to speak together. Shared narrative restores complexity. It prevents history from flattening people into villains or saints, and instead shows them as human beings learning accountability. The narrator's tone glided gently over the words. At the Sarah Dawson Center. Truth was not a punishment. It was a shared language. Later that afternoon, Naomi joined a documentary crew filming a quiet montage of the estate for the Foundation's 10-year report. The camera followed her through the hallways, out to the garden, and back inside to the old library where everything had begun. She sat down at a wooden table still marked by faint scratches from the original audit, small ghosts of paperwork and pens. "It's strange," she said softly to the interviewer, "how paper can both hide and reveal. The same sheets that once erased names now preserve them." The interviewer smiled. "Do you think the house forgave itself?" Naomi looked up at the high ceiling. "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what was done," she said. "It's about remembering without fear. That's what these walls are doing now. They're remembering out loud." That evening, a storm rolled in. A soft one, more rain than thunder. Naomi stayed after hours, sitting in the main hall with Vivian. The rain drummed gently against the windows, echoing through the space like applause muffled by glass. Vivian tilted her head, listening. "It sounds like it did that first night you found the tapes," she said. Naomi smiled faintly. "Only this time, the rain isn't washing anything away. It's watering." Vivian chuckled. "You always were better with metaphors." "You were better with roses," Naomi countered. "Fair trade." They laughed quietly. Two women who had once stood on opposite sides of an invisible line and now shared the same bench beneath the same roof. As the rain tapered off, Naomi stood and walked to the far wall, where one of the newer plaques hung. It displayed a single sentence written in gold lettering. "Even houses can learn to speak again." She traced the words with her fingertips. "Do you remember the first time you saw me here?" Vivian asked. "How could I forget?" Naomi replied. "You looked at the walls like they were strangers." Vivian nodded. "Now they look back like old friends." Naomi turned, smiling. "That's because they finally know our names." The two women stood quietly for a moment, listening to the building breathe, the creak of wood, the soft hum of air, the steady patter of water outside. It no longer felt haunted. It felt awake. When they left, Naomi turned off the lights one by one. The glow faded gradually, until only the reflection of moonlight remained on the polished floors. As they reached the door, Vivian paused. "You know," she said, "if walls could talk, they'd probably say thank you." Naomi laughed softly. "No, Vivian, they'd probably say, 'About time.'" They stepped outside into the cool evening air, the smell of wet roses following them. Behind them, the house stood in silence, but it was the kind of silence that listens, not hides. Walls do not forget. They wait. Every voice, every breath, every kindness leaves an echo. And when truth finally fills a room, even the oldest house begins to hum, not in guilt, but in gratitude for the sound of living again. Night settled gently over the Sarah Dawson Learning Center, folding the sky into soft shades of blue and silver. The house glowed from within, each window lit like a candle, each light a quiet testament to how far it had come. The evening breeze carried the fragrance of roses from the garden, mingling with the faint sound of laughter as the last few visitors left through the gates. The day's final tour had ended an hour ago. Only a few people remained: Naomi Fields, Vivian Langford, Ruth Gardner, and Micah, now a grown man, helping close the museum as he often did when his schedule allowed. "Last door locked," Micah said, holding up the ring of keys that jingled softly. Naomi smiled. "It's strange, isn't it? How peace sounds a lot like closure." Ruth chuckled. "Closure? You're still here every evening, baby. That's not closure. That's love." Naomi grinned. Maybe the two are the same thing. They gathered by the fountain for a final cup of tea before heading home. The water shimmered under the moonlight, casting soft ripples of gold. The same plaque was still there, for every voice once bent to the ground, and the candle holders from the vigil still dotted the edges of the path. Vivian poured tea for everyone, her hands trembling slightly from age, but steady enough to serve. "You know," she said quietly, "every year I think the world will forget this place, and every year more people come. That's because forgetting is harder when beauty stands where pain once lived," Naomi said softly. Micah nodded. "And because people need somewhere to remember that change doesn't have to shout." Ruth smiled. "Spoken like your mama." He laughed. "Guess it runs in the family." A breeze stirred the water's surface, scattering the reflection of the stars into tiny pieces. Naomi leaned forward, watching the ripples. "When I was younger," she said, "I thought stories ended when justice arrived. But I was wrong. Justice isn't an ending. It's a door that opens and you have to keep walking through it." Vivian tilted her head. "And where does the door lead?" Naomi smiled faintly. "To people. Always to people." She looked toward the house, its windows glowing softly against the night. "We made something that listens," she said. "That's all I ever wanted. A house that listens." Micah leaned back on the bench, gazing at the stars. "Mom, do you ever miss the quiet? Before all this, before the movement, before the museum?" Naomi thought for a moment. "No," she said. "That kind of quiet wasn't peace. It was permission. This kind," she gestured around. "The garden, the fountain, the night air. This quiet is earned." Vivian nodded. "Peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from truth learning how to rest." Ruth chuckled. "And truth sure needed a nap after all it's been through." Everyone laughed softly, the sound blending with the hum of crickets. After a while, Vivian stood, brushing off her skirt. "I think I'll take one last walk inside before we go." Naomi nodded. "Don't trip over your redemption." Vivian smiled. "If I do, at least I'll land on clean floors." She disappeared into the hallway, the door closing quietly behind her. Inside, she walked slowly past the framed letters, the photographs, and the polished wood that reflected decades of light and footsteps. She paused at the wall that once concealed Sarah Dawson's initials. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass that now covered the engraving. For a moment, she reached out and placed her palm on it. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me that forgiveness isn't a pardon. it's a practice. When she turned back toward the doorway, she saw Naomi watching from the hall, smiling softly. "Talking to ghosts?" Naomi asked. Vivian shook her head. "Talking to teachers." They stepped outside together, rejoining Ruth and Micah at the fountain. The moon had risen higher, turning the water silver. Ruth sighed happily. "Feels like this place has been waiting all night just to glow." "It has," Naomi said. "For a long time it glowed for no one. Now it glows for everyone." They stood quietly for a while. The kind of silence that doesn't weigh heavy. It floats, like something at peace. Finally, Ruth looked at Naomi and said, "You should say something for the record. For the people listening." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "The record?" Ruth nodded toward Micah's camera, already resting on its tripod. "He's been filming since sunset." Micah grinned sheepishly. "For the anniversary archive." "You always end with the right words, Mom." Naomi sighed, half amused. "You tricked me." "Only a little," he said. "Go on. One more message, for the next generation." Naomi turned to face the camera. The garden behind her shimmered in the moonlight. The house stood softly glowing in the background, windows like warm eyes. She took a breath, her voice gentle and even. "We live in a world that forgets fast. Stories fade, people vanish, and the truth grows quiet again. But if you listen closely, really listen, you'll hear the past still breathing beneath your feet. The ground remembers, the walls remember, and every garden you walk through carries someone's story in its roots." She paused, glancing at the fountain's reflection. "If this story reached you tonight, don't let it stop here. Carry it with you. Speak kindly, listen harder, help someone else be heard. That's how silence stays gone." The air around them felt almost sacred, the kind of stillness that only comes after something important has been said. Micah lowered the camera slowly. "Perfect," he whispered. Naomi smiled. "It wasn't perfect. It was true. That's enough." They lingered a few minutes longer before preparing to leave. Vivian looked back at the house one last time. "I used to think walls were meant to keep people out," she said. "Now I know they're meant to hold stories in." Naomi touched her arm gently. "And we gave them plenty to remember." They began walking toward the gates, the gravel crunching softly beneath their feet. The sound was rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat fading into distance. Before stepping through the gate, Naomi turned back for one final glance. The house stood quiet under the moonlight, the roses swaying gently in the breeze. It looked alive, listening. In the end, truth doesn't destroy, it rebuilds. Houses can learn to listen, gardens can grow from grief, and people, no matter how long they've been silenced, can learn to speak again. If you've walked this far with us tonight, thank you. These stories aren't meant to keep you awake. They're meant to remind you that peace takes time, and that every voice, even yours, matters. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight. If this story gave you something to think about, or if it brought you a little calm, you're welcome to subscribe and share it with someone who might need it. Until next time, may your home be a place that listens, and your garden a place that grows. The camera lingered on the glowing windows one last time as the sound of the fountain faded into a soft hum. The screen dimmed slowly, first the roses, then the water, then the house, until only the moon remained.